When do you want to start? Rory, can we start? Is that all right? Jamie, this should be in broadcast.
I'm just waiting to switch it to Chambers. We're live.
Oh, you can switch it. We're good? Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Jim Manning. I'm the town manager, and I'm just going to do a very brief introduction and turn it over to Jamie Rabbit, who's going to be handling this. So I'm very appreciative of people watching at home, very appreciative for the crowd of people that showed up tonight. Thank you for your interest. And this has been a long time coming. I've been a town manager here for 2 years, 9 months, and I think 3 days or something. Not that I'm counting, but all kidding aside, from day one when I got here, one of the top priority, if not the top priority, for the town councils that I've served are affordable housing, and it's still that way. And I'm very appreciative that the town council has taken the initiative to get us to this point tonight, provided the funding and provided everything we needed to do this study and get going. So Jamie Rabbit is here tonight. He's our planning director. Jeremy Lake from Union Studios, Jay Parker from planning, and Brian Wagner also from planning. And we have an elected official, Representative Fogarty's here. Thank you for coming. And but I will turn it over to you, Jamie, to continue this.
Thank you, Mr. Manning, and thank you, Town Council. I think this is a pretty exciting project. The Town Council funded this back in June. We brought Union Studios on about July. We're a good 7 months into this. In planning terms, we're moving relatively fast, even though 7 months may not seem so. But again, Jeremy will go through the time frame, where we've been, where we're going. Our primary focus tonight is looking at the 3 municipally owned sites, being South Road School, Wakefield Elementary, the Oliver Watson property in West Kingstown, and trying to hone in on development schemes, styles, density, and really what the council likes and what you would like to move forward with. To give some direction to Union Studios as your design team, representing your design team on kind of the parameters there. And Jeremy will go through detail there. He'll walk you through the 3 sites, and then we'll enter into discussion. For the members of the public tonight, there is, at the end of the agenda, a public comment. I'm sure Rory will entertain that aspect of it on the agenda. If everybody can be patient, Jeremy will go through his slides, and then we intend this to be interactive with the council. Ask tons of questions, mark up plans, get a marker out, tell them what you like, what you don't like, what you may not see on the plans that maybe you would have liked to have seen on the plans. But again, trying to get a general sense of, is the design team headed in a correct direction? Are there plans that you prefer, and what plans potentially can move forward through the process? So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeremy, and again, I'd like to thank the people who came out tonight also. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Good evening, Town Council. Good evening, everybody here tonight. Thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Jeremy Lake. I'm with Union Studio. We've introduced ourselves several times now here, so I won't belabor the point. Providence-based firm, do a lot of work, all sorts of architectural projects, community design. We've done a number of projects in South Kingstown as well, so we're really excited to still be a part of this process. I'm not joined tonight by Eric Bush of Peregrine Group. He's providing sort of the developer's lens on a lot of these issues. He has the flu, so he wasn't able to come. The good news is I was supposed to be doing the majority of the talking tonight anyways. I think he'll have a bigger role at the follow-up session we're hoping to have with you guys, so that worked out okay. Just as a reminder, the reason we are here is that we were asked to assist the Town Council in finding ways to support affordable housing initiatives, looking at the 3 sites, as Jamie mentioned, to see what potential they might have. We're evaluating the feasibility. These are just concepts meant to sort of illustrate some ideas, some principles, to get something on the wall to throw darts at, so that we could talk through some of these issues and see what your sort of priorities and concerns might be. And as Jamie mentioned, we were selected in the summer of last year to get this going. What we're hoping to achieve tonight, we're going to sort of quickly review sort of the goals and the overall process. But really what we want to spend most of the session doing is going through each of the 3 sites on their own. We'll share with you guys the preliminary feedback we got from the community when we had our series of community meetings, share with you a summary of the feedback that we got from the boards and commissions when we met with those guys. But again, most importantly, really to garner your feedback. We haven't really had a chance to talk to you guys in great detail about this. We were before you at one point with a quick update, but certainly didn't have much time for a conversation. So that's what we're hoping to do tonight. And then we'll conclude, obviously, with discussion and next steps. As a reminder of the goals of this particular initiative, what we're working on, again, really we're here to help everyone get a better understanding of the property's characteristics, constraints, and opportunities. We're presenting a number of options. We were never intended to sort of say this is the way, this is the only option, but really to put a number of things on the table just to help everybody sort of understand what might be possible. And again, the real focus here is workforce housing. Sometimes we say affordable, sometimes we say workforce, sometimes we say attainable. Part of the conversation with you guys is determining what do we mean? What are we putting out there? What are we trying to achieve? Are we looking for a particular area median income? And each of the 3 sites could be different too. I think that's something worth noting. And as Jamie mentioned, we want to get your feedback tonight about the densities, the architectural character, the layout, some of the other characteristics that we've been sort of talking about, just to see what you guys are thinking about or what you guys think we should continue investigating or what things we should continue looking at maybe in a slightly different way. Our process to date, again, we were asked to come help with basically a visioning and community feedback process. As a reminder, we had 3 separate sessions with the community for each of the sites back in August and early September. And then we had a separate session with the boards and commissions where really we just got some of their initial impressions, and we're mostly just trying to share everything that we had done up to that point. And then we actually asked them to give us additional feedback via a survey. We will talk to you guys in a little bit as we go through this about the input that we saw from that feedback, because we think that's important to consider. As I mentioned, we were in front of you guys back. It was actually in October for just a quick update of where we were in the process, but we were a sort of small agenda item on a really full and robust agenda that night. So we thought it was important to come back tonight and really have a much more in-depth conversation. And I think based on the input we get from you guys tonight, the conversations we have, we'd like to come back before you guys one more time, taking those thoughts into consideration, and like I said, layering some of the things that Eric might bring to the table as well in terms of thoughts about this whole scenario. We also wanted to kind of forecast a bit of where we imagine this is going. In other words, we're doing a sort of a visioning process with you guys, but ultimately, I think your intent really is to select a development partner. I don't think the town's intention is to start building homes and finding people to, live in them. Ultimately, you are going to be selecting partners to help you bring these things to fruition. And the majority of times we see this done through an RFP process. And so we weren't sure how familiar you guys were with that idea, but basically we were only at a first stage where we're really trying to gather input, define the program and parameters that might inform an RFP process. And then there's a series of steps that would have to occur following this to actually get to a real project someday, right? To actually get homes built on some of these sites. Following defining program and parameters, there would be a draft RFP that would start to pull some of those things together, to have a conversation with you all to figure out if it's going in the right direction. And one of the big points we wanted to make in all of this is, one thought would be that you leave this pretty wide open to see what sort of people bring to the table and what ideas might be out there. But the reality is the more prescriptive you guys get, in a way, the less risk and uncertainty it puts on the developers, and will help you guys, I think, more readily compare the various things that are coming in the door. In other words, if you left it wide open, we're interested in anything from a single-family house to a high-rise building, and you start getting things that are all over the spectrum, it's going to be really difficult for you to make a decision. Whereas if you can actually start to put a few things, a few constraints, a few guardrails on that, it'll make it, I think, a little bit easier. And from the developer side, understanding what it is that you're looking for saves them time, right? You're already 2 steps in. You've already gotten some feedback from the community. Maybe you've started to change some of the zoning to make what we're talking about more feasible on some of these sites. So again, there's an important next step following this that sort of starts to outline that RFP process. You all would then refine and approve the RFP. Then from there, you would have a selection process where you would meet with prospective developer partners. And then ultimately it would go, once you have one selected, into the development process. So we just want to make it clear, this is just the first of many steps that would need to occur. So we're excited to be a part of that, but it's not as if what we talk about here tonight is what's going to start getting built next week, right? You guys all know that, but we just want to make sure that was clear for everybody. So again, where we're at and where we really want to focus with you guys tonight is that very first step of defining the program and the parameters. And really, these are some of the key elements that we're going to, for each of the sites, we want to kind of talk through these things with you guys. We really want to start focusing it a little bit on what your thoughts are about the scale and density, what your preferred site approach might be. Again, we drew 3 or 4 schemes on these sites to start to illustrate that potential, but we want to hear from you. Is there one that really stands out to you? Would it be something between 2 of them? Is it something entirely different that we could investigate? We wanted to talk a little bit about the architectural character. You know, if you have expectations about what the building types are or what the materials are, some of those things are important to consider because those might be some of the things that you would make very explicit in an RFP. One of the big questions is whether or not do we expect these units to be for sale or for rent or some mix of the two, and what level or mix of affordability, as I was kind of mentioning earlier, right? There's a broad spectrum of how we might define that. And to what degree do you guys want to be very clear about what your expectations are for that? One of the really sensitive subjects is really starting to think a little bit about what is the public versus the private investment. In other words, all of these sites have some level of demolition that needs to occur. All of these sites will have some amount of infrastructure that needs to be put in place. To what degree is the town helping with those costs versus expecting a development partner to take care of those? And as you can imagine, the more that you put on the development side, you know, the higher the project costs go, the impact, you know, that has impacts on what the ultimate rentals or sale prices might be. And related to that is also the land price. You know, one thing I don't think there's been a determination of yet is whether or not the town will retain ownership of the land, sell the land, give the land to a developer. Those are all things, these are all metrics that when Eric, who isn't here tonight, is trying to help you guys get a better sense of how the financial implications are looking, those are all some of the points that he's going to want to try to get a better sense of in order to help you understand how realistic or how challenged what you're asking the RFP to be might be. 2 other quick points I wanted to make here were that, one, it can be different for all 3 sites. That's why we want to talk about them individually. And second, that at the end, the last thing we're going to circle back to is thinking about whether we should be prioritizing or thinking of a sequence for all 3 sites. In other words, you could say, let's put all 3 out at the same time and just go for it. Or you might say, maybe we should only be doing 1 out of the gate and leave the other 2 for the time being. Or maybe you say, all 3 are important, but this one will be the short term, this one will be in the future term, and this one will be a further ways out. And I think that'll be a really interesting and important conversation to have. All right, I think you guys are well aware of what the 3 sites are, but again, we like to put this up just to remind us all that they are 3 very different sites with 3 very different contexts. All 3 have existing structures. The Oliver Watson site has the historic home on it, and the Toole School sites obviously still have the schools. And one thing I just wanted to make clear is that, you know, as we were tasked with thinking about this specifically relative to housing. And so when we had the community conversations, one of the things that we pointed out was that the Oliver Watson house obviously is primed for being repurposed, reutilized as housing. The schools aren't really that useful in terms of trying to repurpose for housing, and that all the scenarios that we looked at suggested that the schools be removed and other things get put in place, and we think that the community understood that, again, under the assumption that you're doing housing. If you were doing other things on these sites, it might be a different story, but that's the conversation we had. We will go through these in more detail, but again, when in the community meetings, we went through the various options with the members of the community. And we also made sure to represent that when we were talking about a multifamily building or a townhouse or a cottage or a manor house, those could look a number of different ways. And we also think there's ways of designing all of those things in ways that can feel sympathetic to these different sites, right? It doesn't have to feel like it landed from Mars. A multifamily building can just sound like it's out of scale and inappropriate, but in reality, you can design those in ways where they can fit in if you're being sensitive to the surrounding context. So this is a summary, basically, of the key takeaways from those first 3 community feedback sessions. On the school sites we showed, and I'll show it again when we go through them, sort of what we thought the reasonable limits are. You know, the school sites, the schools are actually on much larger sites, right? So we were only talking sort of about a corner of the site, not the entire site. And so we tried to make clear what we were thinking the limits of the development might be, and it seemed like people agreed that made sense. The idea of using the sites for workforce housing, again, when we had the community feedback sessions, I think people understood that that was the intention. These aren't meant to be luxury homes, aren't necessarily meant to be, affordable homes at certain levels. That workforce was at least the initial impetus behind this conversation. And again, they understood that repurposing the existing schools as housing wasn't the best and most appropriate approach. Some of the general lessons we heard in terms of design considerations, whenever we showed larger multifamily options, the community generally felt like that was less compatible. Not surprisingly, I think that's a reasonable thing to think. But when we started to show some of the other scenarios that had more moderate levels of density, I think there was a general understanding that those could be acceptable so long as they were well designed and they weren't cookie cutter, that it wasn't sort of the same thing repeated a dozen times. We would expect some variety in any of these scenarios. Certain individuals that, especially folks that live right next to these sites would reasonably have concerns about buffers and views and setbacks and privacy concerns. So those remain critical things to consider moving forward. And an important thing with the school sites, obviously those are currently publicly accessible areas. They are sitting adjacent to park spaces and playgrounds and sledding hills. And it was made very clear that no matter what happens here, the public should continue to be able to have access to those amenities. So whatever we propose, make sure it still feels like it's publicly accessible, and those public amenities are still available for the broader community to utilize. Some of the additional concerns we heard, there were definitely a number of comments made about thinking about how do we limit or restrict, any of the new housing being short-term rentals, as in like Airbnbs or student rentals. So we know those are sensitive issues in the community and something to think about. We certainly appreciate any new development will bring in an impact to the traffic, and that would be certainly something you would need to review in more detail as you move forward. There were concerns about home values that I think as these move forward, just making sure you're making the point that these shouldn't have a negative impact on the surrounding home values. And a lot of questions about tax implications. Are my taxes going to go up because we're building housing on these sites? So again, things that you would expect to hear from the community, we did hear from the community. And then following those 3 community outreach sessions, we had a session with the boards and commissions, and wanted just to remind everybody of the different commissions and committees that were involved. And as I mentioned in the first session, we were mostly presenting, getting some initial questions and feedback from them, but ultimately what we were asking them to do was really to go back in their own committees and take a little time to talk through the options and give us some feedback, try to rank the scenarios that were proposed to give us a little sense of where they thought they stood, give us some thoughts about the densities that were being shown, what sort of things were we missing, what things were working well or not working well. And we got that feedback from all 8 of those committees for all 3 of the sites. And we'll share that summary as we go through these. All right, so I'll take a breath. Do you guys have any questions so far before we start jumping into each of the individual sites? No? All right, I'll keep it rolling. All right, so the first one we wanted to talk about tonight is the South Road School site. So again, first and foremost here, just pointing out, the yellow lines, I know they're a little faint, are the property lines, the boundaries of the site. So again, the South Road School really sits in the corner of a much larger parcel. That it's a 50-acre parcel in total. In the red dash line was the area that we thought would be the appropriate area to consider for this exercise, which is really an area more like 7 to 8 acres. So again, worth understanding, there's still an additional 42 acres that will continue to be recreational space available. Some of the things we observed around the school was that we wanted to try to stay up at the top of the slope. It really starts to drop off once you get past the play fields and the playgrounds. And that we thought we would try to avoid getting into those areas, not only because you start getting steeper slopes, that's also where a lot of the existing tree canopy is. And there's also a disc golf course that runs back through there. So recognizing we didn't want to impact some of those things, or at least minimize impact to those things. There was a play field and parking, as you can see in the top right of the page, that, again, you could, in theory, suggest you could put homes down on that field because it is a flat buildable area, but we didn't think that made sense as part of the consideration here, but technically that is something that could be on the table. And another thing we observed, when you're passing on South Road, that sort of green that's out on the front, that's almost like a front lawn in front of the school, you'll see in the schemes we generated, one of our initial thoughts was maybe we try to preserve that, not that that was ever really used as a big formal space, but thinking of it as a feature that exists, something that helps sort of buffer a little bit from the road might be something to consider as the project moves forward. So from there, we presented 3 options that, again, were just meant to start to put some ideas on the paper, give folks something to react to, and I'll kind of walk you through each of those and then get your impressions. The first option, option A, really said if we were going to effectively maximize trying to get the most units we could out of the site, what would be an approach we might consider? And the approach we took was thinking of it as a single multifamily building that could have, in this case, we show 94 multifamily units, a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units. Our first impulse, because it would be a larger structure, was to push it sort of back further into the site, sort of back at the top of the hill overlooking the wooded area with the parking it would require in front of it. We certainly got some comments along the way of, boy, it'd be great if we had done the inverse, where the parking was screened by the building. Again, things that we could consider in alternatives if we wanted moving forward. But in the end, we had, 94 units, which translated to about 118 total bedrooms with the mix of 1s and 2s we had considered. At 2 spaces per unit, that's 188 residential spaces. It does add up. And we did include some visitor parking as well. And then on the right, again, we always try to show a few images of what maybe that could look like, because obviously most people can't really understand what they're looking at in a sort of site plan view. So just a couple of examples of multifamily projects, either that we've done or we've seen, that we think do a nice job of bringing down the scale of a big building to feel like maybe a series of smaller buildings. The classic trick of treating the 3rd floor like it's dormers, so it feels more like a 2.5-story building. Some of the things that you could consider if you went this approach. The next approach has said, okay, well, let's not necessarily try to maximize the density here, but let's instead see what we could come up with if we were to try to put in single-family detached homes, but at small scale, more reasonably priced cottages. And so this scheme shows basically half the number of units, 46 cottages, although we suggested they could potentially all be 3-bedroom units, which would suggest you're still getting 138 total bedrooms. So in a way, the same number of bedrooms are being provided, just in a very different format. Each of those has 2 parking spaces, so that's 92 residential spaces plus visitor parking. Again, you can see part of the thought here was to maybe still have some sort of green at the front portion of the site, right when you come off of South Road, starting to have some of the cottages lining and going around that green space, but really creating an internal sort of road network, if you will, with a block in the middle and homes around the edges. One of the features that got pointed out was in the upper right-hand corner. That's a sled hill. Everybody goes there for sledding, and we had that little sort of green space that found its way through the cottages over to that sledding hill. Again, those would be features that you'd want to really think about even more so moving forward. And on the right, again, some images of cottage communities we've done, so showing how it can look, having, cute, well-designed, compact, efficient cottages, with some density involved, right? These aren't 40 feet apart, and that's part of how you actually achieve, getting a reasonable number of units on the site. Again, I think this was 7 to 8 acres of area that we were talking about, so what would that work out to be, like 7 units to an acre or something like that? So we're not talking about extreme densities, but certainly the surrounding area is probably more like 1 unit to an acre, right? So for a third option, we said, okay, is there a middle ground between the two? In other words, if this was half the density of the first scheme, what if there was a scenario where basically we treated the middle block not as additional cottages, but started to show some small townhouse units, so maybe only 2 or 3 units attached. You can see some images on the right of some townhouses that are only in strings of 2 or 3 or 4. Basically, it ends up being the footprint of what you might expect for a more typical larger single-family home, but actually has 2 or 3 units involved. And by keeping otherwise generally the same sort of framework, a series of streets, we have sidewalks for the neighbors to walk around. Again, the public could find their way through here and make their way to the sledding hill or disc golf course. This one has basically, it has 30 cottage units, 27 townhouse units, so basically like a 50-50 split. But that brings you in at 57 total units. So again, somewhere between the 45 and the 94 that the other 2 schemes had shown, still with 2 spaces per unit and some accommodation for guest parking. So last thing I'll say before then getting your guys' feedback on these 3 was the bottom is it's a oversimplification of all the input we got from the boards and committees. I don't know if you guys have been provided those surveys as of yet. If not, we will certainly provide them to you so you can read them in more detail. But we tried to summarize here. I know the colors are a little bit faint on the screen, but for each of the 8 commissions, we show the rank and the score we got for Scheme A, Scheme B, Scheme C, The green highlights the ones that were those various commissions' top ranking scheme. The red represents their lowest ranking scheme. And on the right, I just tried to really summarize, again, what was really 2 or 3 pages of comments into what I thought were some of the more applicable comments to consider for this. So again, I know it's a little bit hard to make out, but this one's actually the most clear-cut in terms of almost every commission or committee suggested that their least favorite was option A. I think, again, that was a lot of the feedback we got in the broader community too, was while we appreciate the idea of trying to maximize the number of units, single large multifamily building is probably going a little too far for this site. And what's a little hard to make out, again, is all but one of the commissions suggested that Scheme C was the one that they thought was the most appropriate, largely being because of the fact that it had it implied variety, different types of units, different types of bedroom counts, and still provided that sort of walkable fabric, feeling like an extension of a residential neighborhood. I will also point out the bottom 2, so 6 of the committees generally did the exercise as we were expecting. 2 of the committees, the Bike and Pedestrian and Sustainability, I think the Bike and Pedestrian Committee really sort of was still looking more broadly at, look, no matter what you do here, we would have very similar concerns about traffic impacts, the sidewalk infrastructure on the adjacent streets, the connections into town. So it didn't really necessarily give us a ranking 1, 2, or 3. So we put them sort of at the bottom. And then the Sustainability Committee, similarly, I think there were times they weren't quite tracking how the scores and the ranking were meant to go, which is okay. At least they were providing some commentary that was useful. So like in this case, the Sustainability Committee had mentioned that they thought felt like an excellent, Scheme C was an excellent solution for this site. So kind of reinforcing that pattern. But again, that was just the initial feedback. And yes, happy to take a question and we're going to go to your guys' thoughts at this point. So,
Is a score out of 10? Is it, you have a rank and a score?
it was a score out of, if it wasn't 10, it was 0 to 9. I can't remember if 9 was the highest number or 10 was the highest number.
Just trying to understand the metrics of this. So.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you. So with that, again, the whole point of tonight is to really start to get your guys' feedback. In other words, we're trying to share what we've heard to date, but ultimately we wanted your feedback as well. On the bottom here, I've sort of reminded you of the various sort of issues that we think are on the table, talking about scale and density, talking about, if one of these resonates more for you than others, are there schemes that we haven't done that we should consider that might be a middle ground or a different direction? Thoughts about the types that we're showing, any thoughts you might have about architectural character, the mix in terms of sale, rent, affordability, and again, the public investment infrastructure and land price, probably a similar conversation between all 3, but maybe not. So I open it up to you guys for feedback and questions.
All right. Any questions? Go ahead.
Not so much questions, but I do have feedback if anybody else has questions.
No.
Okay. So as far as the South Road, I really like option B. I envision that as being a home ownership opportunity, and I would very much like to partner with a nonprofit. I see this as the missing middle of housing, and I really, my original dream has been to be able to subsidize the demolition of the building and achieve grants to put in the infrastructure. So putting in the streets and the electrical grid and the pipes and all that stuff so that we could do a long-term lease, maybe 99 years at least, and then that way we could, subsidize the land and people would just have to pay for the houses. I think that the green space, the pathways, it's a really important property, and I think it could be very nicely incorporated into the surrounding area with the neighborhoods, and it could be like a nice addition to the area. So that's how I see it.
Go ahead.
So I agree. I would like to, I guess B is the less dense option. I get like more of a mixture. I was at it was the combined, yes, I was at the boards and commissions, and I heard feedback that I thought was interesting. I don't, someone said maybe maintaining that belt of green, because that sort of mirrored the law, you know, on the part of South Road, there's, so, am I saying correctly?
Yeah, I think in fact, it is actually.
Did you make a change? I guess
Yeah.
I had a client, so I was late, but,
That's okay.
that was the feedback, just to maintain trees and so that you couldn't see necessarily.
So maybe pull back the first couple homes, create a little bit more of a...
Did you do that?
No, we haven't changed anything yet
Okay.
because we wanted to get your guys' feedback.
Okay.
And then from here, we'll definitely pick up some of those things. So
Because I think that came from either Will Green or someone who had more of a landscape architecture lean, and I thought that really made sense. My other thought that I had after having attended that meeting was, I guess it's a question, would dividing the parcel into two and allowing two nonprofits to sort of work on it be quicker? Because my feeling is, we don't just want this, the community is asking for us to go quickly, so is there any advantage to maybe dividing that parcel up if we didn't choose all homes? Like, that was my question.
yeah, no, I think on any of these, that could be a consideration, or it could be something that you leave open-ended to see what you get in terms of response. I do think if there was a scenario where, let's say the town builds the roads, let's say those are public roads, everything else becomes individual lots. You could almost imagine having 40 partners that are each building, you know, one home on each lot. You wouldn't go that far, but I think there's a number of scenarios you could consider. And that's why even I think there could even be scenarios where you say maybe a portion of this is rental with one particular type of development partner, and maybe a portion of it's for sale with a different kind of development partner. It doesn't have to always be all one thing either, which is basically what your point is.
One more question. So option B shows all 3-bedroom units. So I think I always envision maybe a variety of things, like maybe someone would want a 1-bedroom, or maybe, you know, because the affordable units, a 3-bedroom is the same +1 as a 1-bedroom, right? So it doesn't matter if you have 3 bedrooms and you're helping 10 people live affordably in town. So the creation of a 1-bedroom unit is also advantageous. I'm not saying this correctly, I'm out of my zone here, but I'm wondering if it has to be all 3-bedroom cottages, like.
It definitely doesn't, and I think that's what we were, on some of the schemes, like option C was starting to play with
Okay.
this idea of mixing. Maybe there's some 2s, maybe there's some 3s. Now maybe the question would be, could we do that without necessarily increasing the number of units overall? We could look at that or try to consider. I will say, if you're thinking about something like a 1-bedroom unit, it's typically not cost effective to build a 1-bedroom cottage, right? You start to want the consolidating them maybe a little bit. Not necessarily, you know, at the end of the day, it's all about, we're trying to keep the prices attainable, right? So trying to find the balance of a number of those things is the real trick. But I think what you're suggesting is a variety of types would be a useful thing to consider.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I think what's needed in this community is a lot of everything. So if we, and we only have, we're trying to, if we only do one parcel or we only can get to one quickly, a variety coming forward at the same time would be better than all one type. Because a 3-bedroom apartment doesn't fit everyone's needs. Sorry, thank you.
One of the questions that came up at the session for South Road Schools specifically was neighbors asking about having access to the park beyond. Can you walk me through how that works? Because I can't quite picture it from these diagrams.
Agreed.
Yeah, so I think that would be part of the benefit, say, of maybe having these streets still be public streets and having sidewalks that people could, you know, use to walk through the site. I think what we would ultimately want to do when we look at this more closely, or whomever looks at it more closely, establish where are those important points of access. In other words, we drew something back where the sled hill was, but maybe there's 1 or 2 other points where it's the right place to try to get onto the disc course, for instance.
Well, that's part of what I'm trying to picture, is that specifically because you had mentioned the sledding hill. You know, you may have during the summer a kid that lives on Heritage riding his bike down South Road and going into the neighborhood. I get that. A family wants to bring 3 sleds and the kids in the middle of the winter, What are they going to do? Where are they going to park? How do they access it?
Yeah, so again, I think those are details to definitely think through on all of these sites. I mean, in that particular question, one scenario is if this really is something that, hundreds of people come to sled on, one consideration would be there is a parking lot down at that lower field. People could park at the bottom of the hill, not the top of the hill, still use the hill. If it's a few people come here or there, it's probably less of a, part of what I would always imagine is the streets would have on-street parking that's available to guests, visitors, the public. They could park and come and sled. And I think some of this is just establishing out of the gate to whoever's developing this, this is going to be still a publicly accessible place. This isn't a private gated community, that we're not expecting anybody to come through. It's quite the opposite. This is meant to be an extension of the surrounding community, open with welcome arms, and trying to create those like even that green space at the front in a way is like a symbolic gesture of this is an open community, right? It's one of the concerns I have if you start trying to buffer everything and hide everything, and then nobody really feels like they're supposed to go back there, right? So it's one of those things you need to find the right balance for.
And obviously, there's car parking available through the Curtis Corner access on the other side, but I wanted to see if you were envisioning some sort of parking area for that specifically. Because it seems to me it would be more natural, more organic. If you live in the neighborhood, you walk or you bike through, that makes sense. There would need to be some kind of access on the other side. But if you're taking a car, presumably you're going to go by Curtis Corner.
So I think this is a great comment. This is one of those things that when we take another little pass at this, I can think a little bit more about that. Maybe we do make that feel a little more publicly accessible, maybe have a few little clearly designated guest parking spaces, because if that's something that's, a legitimate issue to think about here.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting add them. I'm just questioning what the process is for people in the neighborhood to access Curtis Corner area.
So, thank you for presenting tonight. Really appreciate your time. Of these two, I like option B and option C. I like option C because it's mixed. It's a 3 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. And I think that option B, or a future option B, if that was what we were leaning towards as a group, could have a mix of 2 bedroom or 3 bedroom cottages with respect to size, right? Not 1 bedroom cottages. I live in a cottage community in Shadow Farm, and they have, and it's quiet, and I'm already seeing folks walking down South Road and taking a left with their dog and walking all the way through down the hill into Curtis Corner, right? And if we pave, modern parking lots, not like the parking lot in Curtis Corner, are super tight, and people just park anywhere in the back of Curtis Corner. So I think if we actually look and study how many actual spots are back there, it'll help with that. So we can look at that. And yeah, that's my questions right now. Besides, being excited about this. So I lean towards option C, but I think option B is great too.
So I agree with Jay. Based on the presentation here tonight, what seems best option to me is option C. I like the variety there, a mix of 3-bedroom units and 2-bedroom units. It also allows for the most total bedrooms. It appears to me that would sort of be the most bang as far as how much people we could get in there. But it also allows it to be aesthetically pleasing, pleasurable to look at. Something which is great too, is that the other commissions are behind it, it appears. I think, if we're looking at option B and potentially altering that to include 2-bedroom units, it really becomes an option C. But if you take option B and you alter it to include 2-bedroom, it's unlike option C in that it would be less units and less bedrooms. So for me, I think option C is really the way to go here. It gets the variety, like I said, and it really allows us to cater toward those, married persons with children. If you have more than 1 children, I would assume you can't go in a 2-bedroom, or you wouldn't prefer a 2-bedroom. So that would really allow us to sort of, cater to, If you have one children, maybe a 2-bedroom. If you have more than that, maybe a 3-bedroom. That's why I like option C here. But what do y'all think?
So, a couple of things. So in considering all of these projects, or any one individually, I think it's very important that we zoom out and look at some of the other projects that we have going on in the town currently and in the pipeline with the planning department. The other night, it's been an extremely busy week for all of us, but we were actually provided the town's financial report. It's a big, thick document the other night, and I'm not sure if anybody's had a chance to look at it, but I was really pleased to see the number of projects that we have currently in development with the 25% requirement on affordability. We do have a number of other units, like, different size units and things, and rentals, and just a lot of different stuff that's in the pipeline. And I'm not sure that this project at South Road needs to do or be all things to all people. And I remember one of the very first meetings that we had, there was a house presented called the Side Hustle House, which I know Deb and I think probably Jess too, we all loved this house because it had like 2 bedrooms, but then it had like a third space that could be for somebody to make it into a business or for a child. And I think that as we go on in this world, people need side hustles to make it. So, and I'm not really crazy about those big buildings of number C, but I do like the idea of the 2-bedroom, if we could incorporate some of the 2 bedrooms and not have those giant buildings, because they don't really seem to fit in that space to me. Yeah. And then, let's see, there was one other thing, sorry. Oh, sorry, of course I'm not going to be able to sign in. All right. So, and then the other thing is that I did know that the EDC ranked this one number 1. So I'd be interested in seeing, that. And then I was also, I couldn't remember what Concom was. Conservation, okay.
I think the EDC ranked the option B as their number 1.
Right, that's what I was noting.
Yeah.
And I like that.
Concom.
So, yeah, that's it, I'm done.
Oh, Concom ranked the first one as their number 1. A is their number, no.
C is 1.
Yeah, okay.
Is 1 the best?
Say, I didn't think anybody ranked option A as their number 1.
Well, see, 1, but then there's the score,
Yeah.
so it's kind of confusing.
Okay. So
There's multiple number 2s.
So regarding options C and B, because I feel like maybe we have consensus that we don't want to put a huge multi-story building, right? So just push that one aside. Is it possible, my concern is there's a lot of units, if option C is over 100 residential spaces, right? So it's 57 units. It could be 100 extra cars every day on South Road. That's a busy, I don't know what the right word for it is, like conduit, thoroughfare, whatever. So there's already a lot of traffic. There isn't any sort of red light so I just worry about 100 zooming cars all the time, plus URI students.
No, and I think it's a valid concern. It came up in all the community meetings. It comes up with any development project. When you get to that point in time, you do a deep dive on analysis. It's usually more about mitigation. Are there improvements? Should there be a traffic light? Should there be stop signs? One thing I do want everybody to remember is there was a school here. I know it's been a little while since it's been open. it had traffic, right? And so it's not as if there's never been, and I also want to just make sure it's clear too, usually when you do those analyses, you come to find out when you really dive deep into it, 100 cars, but over the course of the window of time they operate, it's not like they all turn out of their driveway at the exact same time, nor do I expect there to be 100 cars, even if there's 50 some units, all coming and going at this, same times a day. So it's not an answer other than to say it's a valid concern. It's something that actually it'd be another whole night just talking about traffic if you really got into traffic, and we're at kind of a conceptual stage. I think ultimately you would need to prove out that if it's a fatal flaw, it would come up at a particular point, as would a number of other things with the infrastructure or other sorts of challenges that these ultimately do have. So I think at this point it's a little bit more about what would you see as your ideal scenario, assuming you could solve all of the real challenges that you will need to solve as you move through the process.
I feel like this is the place where it's home ownership as opposed to apartments or 55 and older. I think this just regular people living regular lives who want to live in South Kingstown.
Yeah. That's a good segue to, let's talk a little bit about that, because I know, Patty, you mentioned you saw this as home ownership. I don't think that any of the rest of you weighed in on thoughts about for sale versus rental. We didn't talk much about the affordability. Is this really a mix of affordable levels? Is this workforce? Is this 120% AMI? If you have thoughts on those things, maybe we should pivot and talk about that for a minute.
So I'll jump in on the rental versus home ownership. One of my questions is, how do we sort of, have it ideally be home ownership? It wouldn't be the town putting it up for sale, right? We would, potentially sell the land or gift the land or lease it. And if we leased it, I guess, someone would potentially own the home on top of the lease and lease the land underneath it. I don't see that as ideal. I personally would not invest in real estate if I only own the structure and lease the land underneath it. So if we're looking at that as a path to home ownership, I think we should just be a little bit cautious about that. But again, getting back to how do we get to either leasing or having home ownership, how would we do that? We can't compel someone to buy. We would have to, I guess, work with a nonprofit and make sure that what we want to do is for them to sell it to homeowners. Or if we want to lease it, then when we potentially still own it, lease it to a nonprofit, and then they lease it to a tenant there. So how does this sort of work? Can you further on that?
Yeah, so that's what Eric's really good at talking about, less so the architect. So I think we can get into those issues a little bit next time, like what is the reality of those things? Could you do a land lease but also do ownership? Are there models for that? What are the challenges of that? So again, maybe tonight's what are your leanings if you, without getting into the weeds of some of those things, promising that we will circle back to some of those things in the next session to try to help clarify it. Again, I know that's a frustrating non-answer, but it's also the architect trying to answer instead of the development guy.
How dare you answer for the man with the flu? So I guess what are some of the deliverables tonight that we can give you, right? We have a consensus that option B or option C are options that we as a council like, right? Can we say we like both of these, and can we, and then you can go back to your team and say this is something they like, they preferred a mix, but perhaps with less than 57 total units. And, what can we decide on tonight for this property itself? And I'm going to ask the same questions for the other properties too. And then before you answer that, I think that I've also, Councilwoman Bergner, I've also gotten complaints about, or anxiety about traffic on South Road, about these properties, folks that live in the area and say, hey, if we do this, there's going to be even more traffic. And I think that as we start doing these projects together as a town council and working with Manager Manny, we know that some of the roads in South Kingstown are people are driving too fast, right? And so as we develop these projects, maybe we can work together to try to implement some more new plans, maybe creative plans, to redevelop our roads to slow people down. And as we consider growth, right? Because that's one of the outputs of growth is more traffic. So I just wanted to put it out there so we can work on something new.
So I would say on your first point about the sort of what do we do from here, take from here, again, I think what we're trying to do is we'll gather whatever thoughts you guys have After this, we will talk with town staff to try to come up with what do we think we heard, what do we think is a reasonable scenario coming out of that conversation. It might be 2 options still to put on the table, or it might be something that we think this is starting to get towards what they were considering. What's useful about that is then Eric can really do his work. It's hard for Eric to run numbers when there's still 20 variables on the table. So some of this is we will move towards a scenario that we can get a little more in the weeds on and then talk about that next week, and things could still go one way or the other. I do think we should make it clear. I don't think our expectation at the end of this is that you guys would have designed the neighborhood that's coming here. It's really more about you guys helping make clear what your priorities are, what the sorts of things you're looking for, what are the principles behind it, and what we might draw might be illustrative of an approach that might take to help set some expectations. But if it helps, don't feel like we collectively in one more meeting are going to have designed a whole neighborhood exactly how everybody is hoping for it, because it's more complicated than that.
Jeremy, another question for you here. If we wanted sort of the makeup here to be affordable to those 60% to 100% AMI, we want that range to make up sort of the whole plot here of real estate. Is that feasible? Would we need to mix in some fair market rate just to make a developer more incentivized to do this? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so with any of those, again, Eric, I think will help paint the picture a little bit. I think those are but one input of several that help understand what the financial feasibility of it is. That's why we started to bring up some of the infrastructure thoughts too, right? If the developer is having to put those in, that's going to have a financial implication. Some of those AMIs even determine what sort of funds are available out on the market from other entities to help fund the project. And there are cutoffs for some of those too, right? So if we were to say, let's do a project that's 120% AMI, there might be less funds available for that. So how are you making up for that? So I think one thing he can do next week is help us see a scenario, see where the gaps are to try to understand how would we close those gaps, or if we shifted some of those variables, what impact would that have on the feasibility or chances of it?
Okay.
Is there any way to predict if we're talking about some combination of B and C here, say 125 bedrooms, 100 units, and the mix, 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom. Are there any statistics out there as to what, if that was built and drew a market and they all sold out, how many of those units would wind up including families with children that would then need education? I don't know if that's possible even.
Yeah, there are statistics out there on single-family and multifamily. Cornell University did a number of those studies. Some of them are 4 to 5 years old, some are a little bit older than that. But we can look at some of the analysis. Apartment units have less kids than single-family homes. 3 bedrooms have the tendency to have a little bit more, but we can look at that complexity and try and get you. Again, they're going to be general and broad-based numbers, but Mike, to your point, if you look at item C, and I think the input you're giving Jeremy and us as your staff is incredible tonight, because Mr. Wegmont asked, what can we do for you? Well, tonight you've eliminated A from my perspective, right? So we're down to B and C, and when you're talking about C, you didn't like the triplexes. So I think Jeremy's hearing single family, 2, 3 bedroom, maybe there's a tolerance for duplexes. And if you look at C, there's 7 triplexes. So you have 57 units. If you made those duplexes, you're down to 50 units. That affects your traffic counts, affects bedroom count. And with a duplex, maybe you can do 2 bedrooms versus 3 bedrooms in a different footprint. So again, the feedback you're giving us and Jeremy, I think, is wonderful right now, and lets the design team refine the product. So to Jeremy's point, Eric can try and refine the numbers.
And if you can provide us with those studies or demographic numbers just to give us an idea.
Yeah, I'm not going to reproduce them. I'm going to give you sources that have compiled the information.
That's fine.
Okay.
I think it's helpful to the council. I mean, we just had this discussion 2 days ago at the meeting about our school enrollment projections, and I think it's fair to say that we've got the capacity for some additional children based on what we've already got in place. But I'd also want to know if, if the numbers were huge, we also don't want to go into exceeding our capacity. It would be helpful to know that.
Jamie, I just wanted to say, I think you summarized just recently really good feedback. I think I think what I truly want is C with less density, because I want less density, I want variety, because I think the needs in the community are so diverse. And I hear, Patty, we know that there'll be apartments in other locations and other things, so we know that that's happening. It just, at some point, well, one is next week the meeting? Because you said next week, and then I got a little...
Sorry, I didn't mean to say next week. We
Okay.
don't know when that meeting will be yet.
Okay,
It's not been
at our
scheduled.
next meeting. Then I just wanted, at some point, I think what Rory's talking about is home ownership, and I'm not sure, I feel like when you buy a home through Habitat, it is your home, and you're not thinking leased land and all of that. So I hear you about, like, it wouldn't be an investment for you, but I don't know if, I thought of it that they would actually feel like the homeowner, even if it's a 99-year deed restricted lease. So I don't think the Habitat homes are leased land, right? They are leased land? Really?
They do it, yeah.
For 99 years?
And so again, on some of these things, again, just getting your general feeling is okay for now. You weren't here earlier, but when we talked about there's a process even for creating an RFP. There will be many more of these conversations ahead, even when you're into that stage, about the very particulars about land lease, not ownership, not all those kinds of implications before you get there. So again, I think of tonight as like trends, not necessarily like the answer, unless there are
Okay.
things that you feel confident about giving the answers about.
And so that,
Oh.
as far as AMI and all of that, that's farther down the road in terms of like what we would be interested in?
I think what
Or do you want
what
Patty's
Jeremy's
saying
trying,
to discuss
attempting
it
to
now?
articulate is, we'll use a number. Suppose you get down to a count of 40 units. Those 40 units are going to dictate a certain amount of infrastructure. Length of roads, sidewalks, street trees, all of that in the public realm has to be paid for and constructed. Do you bring sewer to the site? There's a cost associated with that. Now you have a number. Now he gets to look at what is the cost to bring the development shovel in the ground for sites for someone to build on. Then you can look at how do you finance that? And does 60% AMI with X number of subsidy carry that number? So again, once you understand what the costs to develop this site are from an infrastructure standpoint, you can dive a little bit deeper into the complexities of 60%, 80%, 100%, 120%, affordable versus market rate, and any mixes there. Again, to Jeremy's point, that's a little bit of a discussion further down.
Okay.
But this discussion to get you to hone in on, I don't like A, I like B, C's really good, but maybe get rid of the triplexes, lets us hone in on the numbers to know how much street width we need, how length of street, sidewalks, parking, and all of that infrastructure, which has a cost associated with it.
Jamie, do you think you have enough with this South Road where we can move on to the next
I
one?
think
I would like to add something
Yeah, go ahead.
on this. So as far as the South Road, I really think that we need to be between 80 and 100% of AMI, maybe up to 120. Just having sort of played with the numbers before, it seems to me that if we were able to subsidize the cost of the land and the infrastructure, that we would be left with maybe about 250 or 300,000 that the individual homeowner would have to cover the note for, and I think that would be around $1,800 to $2,000 a month, which would, I believe, be attainable for 80% AMI, which for a single person is 75,000 SK. For a married couple, it's like maybe 98,000. So you're talking about people that make between 60,000 and, let's quickly, the math, like, accountant, what's?
I know what you're counting.
Yeah,
followed all
like,
that, right?
Right,
Yes.
so, but like, so 80% of 98,000 is like 77?
Yeah, Yeah, well,
some 70-something thousand. So that's where we're trying to aim towards. We're not necessarily building this for somebody that makes, you know, $200,000 a year. We're making this for 80 to 100 or maybe 120, I think. Because the people have to, the homeowners need to be able to cover the note. And that's what the note's going to be. We can only slice it and dice it that much, you know. And also, I just wanted to say that hopefully we'll be able to, I know the House has passed, you guys passed a housing bill, and I know we're all competing for it, but if we could get a slice of that pie, and I appreciate Rep. Fogarty here to hear our pleas to give us some demo money and infrastructure money. Thank you.
Yeah, how much can we put you down for?
Have you got a checkbook, Kat?
All right, so I think we should move on.
Just
Does that
super
make
last
sense?
thing.
Yeah, sure
Between,
thing.
you know, green space, like in, you know, trees to, to provide, if we have density there, right? Trees between the units always do a good job at providing privacy in small ways. So just want to put out there.
Yes.
And I apologize for, we maybe covered it, but the access to the disc golf, and there's a few holes right at the top, you're going to keep that all protected, right? That's not in your scoop of land?
I honestly don't know exactly what the trajectory of the discs are.
Okay.
But I would
Me
say
either.
that I think we are pretty close to being fine, or
Right.
I imagine you can move those a little bit if a little bit of revision needed. The point was not to go well into it where you totally jam it up.
Right.
So I don't know if people cut corners or do what, because I've not
I
played it.
just feel like
but-
it comes out over there.
Deb, I actually think that's holes 7 and 8 over there, and I think that right here is the line. So this is where the cup is, right there. So they are not in it
Right.
for the design. So
And last point on that, you were talking about side hustles earlier, the kids selling lemonade out back to the disc golfers, and
Right.
there's the profit right there. Subsidize it, yeah, exactly.
Well, and I just, as you see, that is the disc golf at the end, but you could put a walking trail right there to access the park. It can't be parking necessarily but people who come down from Tuft Hill and walk their dogs on a daily basis, if there was a wooded trail, they wouldn't even necessarily have to go through people's streets. But I do like the idea of the streets being public.
Okay. Great. We'll keep going. If things come up, we'll circle back. But why don't we keep moving on, because we've got 2 more sites, although I think we're doing okay on time. All right, next up is the easy one, Wakefield Elementary site. I'm being
Feel we're
facetious.
Wakefield?
Wakefield. All right, so Wakefield Elementary, as you guys are probably aware, it's the exact same school, but obviously on a much smaller area, right? The site area is much smaller. Again, the school is only a portion of the larger parcel. It's basically like an 8-acre parcel that also includes Saugatucket Park. So the area we dashed in red is roughly 3.5 acres, and took a similar strategy of maybe it's sort of at the top of the hill, and we were trying to just avoid the playground that exists out there. Really it's really the parking areas, the paved areas around the school and the school itself. We highlighted the footprint there in black. One of the interesting conditions we saw here, not only is there the park, so certainly you would preserve the park as it is today, certainly a potential means of making the park feel as if it's more expanded and connected over to the bike trail. We think there's a real opportunity here to do that in a more intentional way. And in terms of access, there's certainly the primary access off of High Street, but there is also this quirky condition at the sort of top left corner where School Lane comes into the site. School Lane's kind of a funny little condition where the homes that are on High Street face High Street, and it's kind of their backyard is School Lane, and then there's a couple homes on School Lane where that is their front. So one of the things we were trying to be mindful of is that is a connection that we could make, but maybe we really try to make sure that the High Street entrance feels like the entrance, because that other one is this kind of somewhat people's backyards and somewhat a pretty quiet little street. So we were trying to be sort of cognizant of that when we were coming up with these options. So on this first slide, we just wanted to quickly make the point, and then I'll turn it off. The dashed black line is the existing school, And so for this first scheme, we tried to show a multifamily building that was akin to it in the sense of it being an L shape similar to what was there, but certainly pulled sort of closer to the park, so it was a little bit further from the existing homes that are on Northup Street. So now I'll click it so that that school isn't in the way. The first two schemes, option A and option B, you'll see are very similar. The only real difference is whether or not we include mixed use on the site or not. By mixed use, meaning commercial in addition to the residential. In a way, I already think these are going to be mixed use in the sense that there's a lot of recreation plus residential. And the question is whether or not you also then try to layer in some kind of commercial use here as well. That was a suggestion we heard before the process even started. I think if you were going to consider commercial, you'd probably want to put it out towards the park, across the pedestrian bridge, where it's sort of the most obvious and accessible. One thing to understand is that commercial space not only takes up space that could otherwise be residential units, commercial uses also typically have higher parking requirements than residential, so it's just something you need to think about when you're trying to limit how much parking's here. Just understand there's trade-offs with incorporating commercial. Otherwise, commercial could be a really cool idea that it could help activate the park edge, et cetera. So in this scheme, we're showing roughly 5,000 square feet of commercial, with 54 multifamily units in the remainder of the building, being a mix of 1 and 2 bedrooms. We were contemplating this as a 3-story building, probably treat it as 2.5 stories like the examples we showed on the right-hand side. 81 total bedrooms with the math we had done. And in this case, I think technically your zoning is 2 spaces per unit, but we thought if there was a place that you could probably get away with a little bit less, it would be here. And so we are just doing the math based on 1.5 spaces per unit. I think there were comments we got from some of the boards and commissions, maybe we should do even less than that. So I think that's a great example of one of those things. We didn't really talk about it in the first site, but it is very important. You know, the amount of parking you request or require has a big impact on sort of what's feasible and doable, especially when you start to consolidate the parking because you're doing a multifamily approach. So it looks like I accidentally tabbed forward, but I'll stay back here. We also knew that, you know, some people will come and continue to use the playground, so we included 10 public parking spaces here for folks using that. So again, that was option A. And then option B, which was really a numerical variation on the theme, was to say if you didn't do mixed use, you could probably add another, what was the difference in math, from 54 to 63 multifamily units. Again, a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units. Again, otherwise the scale and configuration and character of that could be very similar just without that mixed use component in the ground floor. As we did with South Road, we then tried to look at a scenario where instead of doing larger multifamily, we scaled it back a bit. In this case, we didn't do the cottages, we just went straight to townhouses, but still continued to hold those basically in sort of strings of 3. I think the photograph on the top right is a good representation of that. I think if that only had a single door instead of 3 doors, you would just assume it's a large single family house. So we do think that that's a strategy for, you know, providing what is a slightly higher level of density, but in a form that can still feel reasonable. In fact, if you look at the single family homes that are on High Street and School Lane in Northup, one of those typical footprints is not so different than what we are basically putting 3 smaller units in this scenario. For this, we introduced a new road that sort of comes in and holds the edge of Saugatucket Park so that it would feel like a very public and approachable edge. We included 20 public parking spaces along that roadway. And then you can see the intention was to have the townhouse units have their front doors either along that street or on that internal green space that we've created, with the parking really being, in our mind's eye, sort of behind those units in those parking courts to the back. One of the benefits of this is that the folks that live here would be able to feel like that sort of green space in the middle is sort of more of their space. You know, if they were going to have a happy hour or do some kind of neighborhood activity, there would be a space that feels a little bit more private in terms of their use, whereas all of Saugatucket Park across that road would feel, as it is today, very public and accessible. This was 31 townhouse units, 72 total bedrooms, 65 spaces if they had 2 spaces each, again with the 20 public parking spaces out on the road. And then for option D, again, as we did with South Road, we said, well, what if we mixed it up so it's not just one type, although we had said it could be 2 and 3 bedroom townhouses. So in this case, we introduced a type that we sometimes call a manor house. So in the upper right hand, that image, the idea is that it's something, it might be a little bit bigger than a single family home, but it's comparable to a big single family home that might have as many as 6 1-bedroom units in it. So it's a nice way of incorporating 1-bedroom units, but in something that still feels appropriate to a single family neighborhood sort of community. That let us get the count up to 50 total units, 20 townhouses, 30 in those stacked flat manor houses, for a total of 70 bedrooms. And again, because some of these units are getting to be smaller units, we again suggested maybe there's consideration here for only requiring 1.5 spaces per unit instead of 2 spaces per unit. Again, some folks thought in any of these scenarios you could even request or require less parking because they should be able to walk or bike to any number of things. When talking this over or getting the input back from the boards and commission, this one was much more mixed in terms of people's feelings. The Historic District, the Affordable Housing Committee, and the Economic Development Committee all felt like option A was their preferred, although I will say I think in 2 of the 3 of those, what they were really interested in was the mixed use. It was really, I think, the mixed use component, less so than the fact that it was in a multifamily building. I think the affordable housing group was the only one that kind of commented specifically that this is a great site for as much density as we can get because it is in town, close to so many services, close to so many needs. So again, for I think differing reasons, 3 of the committees picked option A as their top choice. I will say the Concom liked option D the best. They liked that there was a lot of variety, that there was the opportunity to have some impervious areas with some of those green spaces. Similarly, Bike and Ped Group and sustainability, we're still talking generally more broadly than thinking about specific schemes, one versus the other, and good things to consider, but not necessarily giving us a hint as to which one or the other might be preferable. And then I will say, interestingly, in this one, the Planning Board and the Recreation Committee both felt strongly that housing wasn't necessarily what the highest and best use here might be. So rather than rank the schemes, they just said, we're not doing a ranking because we think it shouldn't be housing, or at least we would need to talk about it more if we were going to consider it for housing. So they put ones across the board to try to illustrate that point. So with that all said, now we would again turn it back to you guys to get your thoughts, feedback, input, same series of questions, considerations. So let's get after it.
All right.
So what you're saying is, from the Planning Board, Recreation Board, Bike and Pedestrian Board, and Sustainability Board, we got ones all the way across like it's a minesweeper. Is that right?
Right.
Because they didn't want to rank?
For the Planning Board and Recreation, I think they didn't want to rank. They wanted to make a point that they don't think it should be housing. This is an opportunity for other things, or if it is housing, it's with other things too. I won't speak for them, but intentionally not ranking. They ranked the other 2 sites, but this one they said, we're not interested in doing a ranking. The Bike and Ped and the sustainability, as with the previous ones, I think they were more so saying, we're looking at this more broadly. We're not looking at A versus B versus C. In any scheme, we'd have concerns about, are the streets, going to be still safe at the tail end of this? Are there opportunities for solar panels, right? So that's why we toned I know it might be hard to see on there, but the Planning Board and Recreation Boards, we did sort of like a yellow tone versus a gray tone for the Bike, Ped, and sustainability, because I think they did it for different reasons.
Well, I guess it's unfortunate that they didn't rank anything, because I would have appreciated their subject matter expertise on this, but instead they gave us ones. So,
well, again, I think from their perspective, I don't want to speak for them, but reading the comments, from their expert opinion standpoint, they think this should be thought of as maybe a place for recreation uses or a place for other uses, not necessarily housing. So I think they were weighing in a way too, right? So, yeah. And I'm sure some of them are here tonight and we'll be happy to clarify during the public comment period.
So for option A, I have a question. So the commercial space is only on that, whatever, south end, so to speak, I guess, right? Is it possible, I don't know what, I guess you're building, you want to show the middle option of the houses? It looks like that? No? Yeah, so that, the middle picture is sort of what that's what
Yeah.
the idea is?
Yeah, so for any of these, again, the thought was it would be like a 2.5-story building. The question would be, would some portion of the ground floor be units, or
Right.
would it be offices or some other commercial use that could go in there?
So again, at that meeting that we were at, I think, I don't know who it was, the same invested board member said, because of the way the lot is, you could build higher, because there's a big hill, right? It's kind of set down low to the river. Do you remember this?
I do. It came up with the previous site, though. it was at South Road because it drops off. There was a comment that maybe
No, it
you
was,
could do units, it was here too?
it was the historical school that was there was shingle style, and we could mimic that, and it could support a taller building.
Yes, so that was, yes, the comment was, so for instance, the shape of this doesn't feel like it's being very respectful to the edge of the park, which I totally agree with. I think it was a great critique. If we were to do another version of this, I might change the way that building is shaped.
Okay.
And that committee member was pointing out, historically, the school that was here before the current Wakefield School was this beautiful historic building. I tried to find a picture, haven't found one yet, would love to see one. But that it was a
have
shingle-style building that was probably
have
2
it.
or 3 stories that, was
Right.
on the edge of the park. That could be a good precedent for how you could treat this approach if you wanted to try that.
Right, so that feedback was really resonating with me, and also I'm just wondering if you could put mixed use on the whole first floor to sort of mimic what I think a lot of people like is the look of the Bell Block on Main Street, and sort of, yeah, I got a bunch of nods, so I'm gonna go with that. So I think people really love that style, or want to evoke that feeling, and so and then it may address what I think the planning board was hoping for, is more mixed use. ADC is more mixed use. That park draws a lot of people. We have had amazing events there, and it would just be a cool place to have another restaurant, a coffee shop, some hangout spot. Cities are vibrant when people are there at all hours of the day and night. You know this, but I'm just saying more retail over there, and it makes sense. I think that would be a better hybrid to me, where people live above the store. And I think Jess said she liked the idea of like micro lofts, little lofts, and artist space, and that's where I kind of felt like this could go. If we're going to do more families in home ownership at South Road, this would go to another niche of like smaller spaces where one person or smaller households could live above the store like that. That's what I thought was going to happen there, and not have it look like we shoved in a whole bunch of villages on the green look.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do something a little different, because we have each has their own personality. So I was trying to have them have their own flavor.
We've got representatives from the EDC here, and I think that was the initial
And
push
planning.
that they presented was commercial on the first level and then residential above.
Is it possible? I'm sure anything is possible, but
Yeah, I think that the only thing to understand is the trade-off of, and especially depending on the commercial uses, the parking requirements are generally pretty high. So if suddenly you put a really successful restaurant here, you might need a whole lot of parking, and you wouldn't be leaving a whole lot of room for residential. It's that classic finding the balance. Now, that's why we were trying to show kind of that there was some, even what this is not determined, right? It's just generically commercial, because it
Right.
wouldn't be predetermined. So I think, to your point, if you could do sort of smaller units and they have less of a parking demand, you might be able to, find a reasonable balance for some of that. I think there's also a reasonable question about, while this could support some commercial, do you really want to create something that might not compete necessarily, but your current Main Street really is your commercial, focal point. And that's where I think here, maybe some bit of commercial that overlooks the park would be a nice thing. Is there a point where you go too far? Right now, there's not a lot of commercial demand, residential. So I'm just saying there's a host of things you would consider.
Yeah.
So anything's possible, but those are just some of the things I would think of.
well, that's I would want much more. I would want it to be truly mixed use, and not a thought of mixed use with just 5,000. Some of the struggles with some of the restaurants that have been on Main Street is the footprint isn't big enough to really have enough turnover for them to make profit. We've seen Duck Press was something else, was Mary Murphy's was something else. Like if you go all the way back, how much people go quite far back, it's been 10 different restaurant names. It's a struggle there. Fat Bellies, right? We could play trivia. But I feel like that struggle is not big enough to turn the tables to make enough money or whatever, so maybe a larger restaurant space. And I think it's kind of neat that you would eat in a restaurant, walk across the river, get an ice cream cone, walk somewhere else. So I think it's not going to compete. I think there's an interest for that. So look at what's happening already. We'll be saying Phil's or something. No.
So I think that is a great idea, and I can see that sort of developing maybe just a little bit further down the road. From what I see, or what my perspective is, and what I'm concerned about, is it's my understanding that that tonight sort of finishes up the contract so far, and that if we're going forward on the design, that it's going to cost more. So given the controversy or the sort of the grassroots efforts that have led to the petition, and the fact that we have a lot of our boards and commissions that are not really on board with this at this time, and I would rather like focus our energies on a project that we can really like break ground on, because I think it's going to be very hard to get any money. I'm just being realistic. I just want to make sure at the end of 2 years that we have a shovel in the ground, instead of just like all these other like plans and you know, reports, this, that. I'd rather spend the money and really focus on South Road. So, but that's what I think.
But this might be a really attractive, like a developer might be very interested in this spot, and then it's an easy pass over to someone who's going to do it the way we envision it. So like, I hear you, I want the same, like, you want to have some accomplishment happen. You don't just want to have us have 7,000 meetings and meetings like this. But I think, I want to protect the park and the pieces that the community, like, here's what I really think. We can do both of those things. We can do some mixed use, we can do some residential in some way, and we can protect the community's idea to maintain a park and enjoy the only urban-y park that's functional.
Well, and I know that you
if
have a background in this, so in planning, like,
Yeah.
that's kind of what so I think you have some great ideas. So if we could do it, great.
Go ahead, Jay.
Thanks. So I would, if I were to lean onto anything, I think this project, let me rephrase that. I know one of the most thriving main streets in Rhode Island on a town level is East Greenwich. And lots of people, young people especially, live on the second and third and fourth floors in East Greenwich and have a great time by walking around Main Street and living in a one-bedroom, very rarely a two-bedroom unless you're lucky. But the one-bedrooms and big studios are critical for young people who are young professionals who are trying to live on their own, may not have a partner, and need somewhere to live that is attractive. And South Main Street in South Kingstown can be that spot. I would say that Councilwoman Bergner's idea of mixed use, and also getting the boards that aren't on board yet on board with a plan that they may agree with, right? I think that it's also critical that if we're going to say option D, right? Say we lean towards option D, we would probably need more than 10 public parking spots, right? We would need the spots to be there so folks can go to the park right there and enjoy it. And I like the idea of the park space right here either being, moved into the Parks and Rec, but really just focus, because the people that sign those petitions, there's a lot of folks, and I think it's a good idea. But that doesn't mean that we should not have one-bedroom apartments in downtown, because we have this opportunity to really build a catalyst for downtown Main Street. Again, Main Street is not by accident. It is by persistence and growth and support, and having a nexus of folks that live there and get to walk down into Main Street will be a critical support for restaurants and businesses in the winter. And that's what I feel.
So I agree with a lot of what Councilman Wedgemont said right there. I think if there's going to be any of these properties that we go for mixed use, it would be Wakefield. I mean, it's really the only opportunity to do it. It meshes well right into our downtown area on Main Street, obviously. I like the idea of a mix of one-bedroom and two-bedroom here. If we're going to do more of a two-bedroom and three-bedroom at South Road, I think it's important to have some variety. while we tailor toward, families at South Road, here we'd be more tailored toward younger professionals starting their career, trying to get stability. I like the idea of commercial on the first floor. I think that allows us to enhance our commercial spaces in SK. That's a goal of ours. We have a very small percentage of the land in South Kingstown is zoned commercially. So this will allow for at least a little bit expansion of, hopefully commercial business. But I agree in the sense that if we have people, more people, younger people living, in an upstairs above
Or
commercial
fun
space.
older people, right? we're not ageist here. If you're a
Just
fun
for
older
example,
person,
just making an example here.
absolutely.
I think just having more people located there, living there, allows for more people in and out of our local businesses. It'll be more transactions, more commerce. It's just better for the town, better for the businesses. And if we're going to do any mixed use, this is the place to do it. But it's also important we preserve the park. There's an interest in the park. We have a lot of events at the park. In the summertime particularly, we have
We all agree.
ceremonies there. And there's a need, a lot of people want to preserve the playground, have access to it, and they should. So if there's a way to increase the parking for public spaces related to the park, I think that's ideal. But I'm leaning toward option A here, definitely.
So can I just say that I think moving away from 2 and 3 bedroom to 1 bedroom and studios really speaks to, I was saying to Patty on the side, each property is a different formula, a different recipe, and so making it a little bit different than, to me, I think option D feels a lot like South Road's option that we're considering, so I feel like that would not be where I want to go. I agree with, I think we seem to want
Option A.
option A with more mixed use than just looking at maybe the first floor as all,
I like that, yeah.
right? And then that idea, and then take Jay's idea and do studios and 1 bedrooms, because maybe you could do a better mix of the market, right? You could have market rate, someone might want to build 5 market rate 1 bedrooms to give us 5 affordable, and maybe finance the project better.
It's the stacked flat units that I like the idea of in D, not the townhouses, but
If we did
Well,
option
A.
D, is there a way to do mixed use with option D? Could that work?
Yeah,
A.
I mean, we could consider any number of things, because I will say one of the other scenarios someone put out there was, do you do a little bit of mixed use out on High Street,
Yeah.
and then it's residential behind? So I think there's scenarios, but I did want to clarify something real quick before I forget. Tonight isn't the last time you're going to see us. We're going to definitely come back one more time.
Thank God.
We're going to take all these things and consolidate them into something that, this is what's helpful, is we're getting to something
Right.
where we could take another cut, you can react, that's when you can decide, let's just focus on South Road, not this, whatever, so that don't worry about that necessarily having to be a factor tonight per se.
I have appreciated hearing my fellow counselors' perspectives on that, and I could definitely see it as it's being described. I'm very happy and gratified that we're going to respect the park, and it would be really a cool spot, for artists or whatever. I love that idea, but I just really want to get at least one thing with the shovel in the ground.
So one thing I will say, when I said Bell Block idea, a whole bunch of them that are in the audience nodded, because you can visualize that. So while I hear you guys about D, I think the more mom and pop living above or below the shop is sort of, I like the one.
Yeah, I'm with option A. I'm
Okay.
just sort of trying to flesh out that idea. I
Yeah,
don't see a
okay.
possibility where there is option D with commercial, on the
Yeah.
first floor. I just don't see that. I think option A sort of maximizes that. Commercial first floor, I love that idea.
Yep.
And then it sort of meshes right into Main Street there. One thing I want to ask you, obviously option A is a mix of 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom. We're talking about the possibility of making a more concentrated 1 bedroom. What is there more of a demand for? Can you answer that question?
I don't know the specifics, so we didn't do a market analysis, but in my experience, there's a demand for everything.
Okay.
Like, especially if you're talking about affordable, attainable options,
Right.
there's no wrong answer.
Does it
You know.
make sense if you go more toward 1 bedroom, you do more, rental, leasing, whereas if you do 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, it's more of like home ownership? Because I look at it as like 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom is like a family. And ideal there is home ownership. Whereas 1 bedroom, maybe that's leasing. Maybe it's sort of rental. You're only there, I don't know, short duration of time until you find the home you want to buy, which could potentially be a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom down the road. Does that make sense? Is that what you see out there? Or?
No, I think so, and I think especially if you are thinking of it as a mixed-use structure, it's probably easier to imagine there's somebody that owns the building, manages the whole thing, rents out the various spaces, rather than creating some kind of condo association where everybody owns their apartment and somebody owns some of the commercial spaces. So it probably would prefer a rental kind of model. So.
I will say, Mr. Perez, I do know many young couples, young partnerships that they want a 2-bedroom because they want their parents to come visit, or they want a sibling to come visit, and they need that extra space. And they may not have children at that point, or they're trying to plan for it. So, as you understand, yeah,
Makes sense.
absolutely.
We haven't heard anything from you, and I just also wanted to point out we should keep going too. We've got another site, but I do want to hear if you've got some thoughts here.
That was the
Yeah.
other thing, is it's
Yeah.
7 minutes after 8. We're supposed to end at 8:30. For consensus purposes, I think the general concept of option A is my preference as well. I think Rory's right. Option D doesn't work for multi-use. I'm concerned about the density, though, even as you've got it outlined here. The more commercial space you put in, I think it's going to impact traffic, it's going to impact the need for parking, and the more dense use we make of the space, the less parking is going to be available for people to just come and use the park. So I'd want to see something that sort of balances those out.
Can I just ask, are there an options that we know we don't want, right? We have 4 options here. Can we narrow down what we don't want?
I don't like B, C, or D.
We want more mixed use. We want a model that shows mixed use, maybe, I think, 1 building, right? We all, 1 building?
Is that what we're feeling here?
Yeah.
1 building.
Cool.
Yeah, and again, that's what we'll show you next time, and then you can react
Yeah.
to that too, right? So.
And that's where that gentleman said you could build higher. So like maybe it's not a 3-stack, it's a 4-stack, so then you're building a smaller, taller, and you're getting some of the space and parks. Maybe that's the answer.
Well, with
High
one
rise.
caveat
Or
about
go
that.
high rise.
Because
What?
it,
30-story high-rise.
No,
kidding.
we don't want that.
How dare you?
no, but that was part of the discussion at the South Road workshop was, and you've addressed it, I just want to reinforce it. You've moved it to the other side of the property so that you don't have 3 stories looking over the neighbors on the north upside.
Yeah.
Just two comments to add, and Mr. Marin touched upon it, I'll just expand on it again. The more commercial you add, the more impact it has on your ability to provide residential. If you look in option A, there's a total of 91 spaces with 5,000 square feet of non-residential. To Jeremy's point earlier, even if you put in that 5,000 square feet a successful restaurant in half of it, and then something else in the other half, you're looking at 60-plus spaces that need to be dedicated to that residence, which only leaves 31 for the residential units. So, Mike, you touched upon it, that Jeremy needs to find the balance in that. We understand the objective is to get as much non-residential on the site while trying to balance the residential side of that. The other aspect of that, and I'll ask you on behalf of Jeremy, from a structural standpoint, we understand first floor retail mixed use, second floor residential, third floor residential. Would it be possible to do that in 2 buildings that can architecturally complement themselves, which may give him a little more flexibility on the site? Just for design flexibility.
I
for
think
the architect.
that sort of goes away from that bell block look that we know and feel comfortable with. If you sort of did 2 buildings where it was 1
I'm just
commercial,
asking.
1 residential.
Where would-
How
where would it
about,
go?
I understand what your objectives are, and I'll come back and I'll show you something. And one of the things I will say in the next round too, I think we're going to do some like renderings where you'll be able to see it 3-dimensionally. So I understand what you're trying to achieve, and I think just if you would let me have the flexibility of maybe it's 2 buildings or 1 building, I understand where you're trying to get to, if that's fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to say, I think if you give us 2 options, we can then
Yeah.
sort through them. And for what it's worth, this is the most difficult of the 3 sites anyway. It's just got its own challenges. The other two, I think, are low-hanging fruit, and we should be able to get to something where we can move it along and get shovels in the ground, but this one may take longer.
Can I use that as my segue?
Yourself.
All right.
Watson home.
I've been trying for 10 minutes.
All right.
Watson home.
Oliver Watson House. All right, so obviously a very different context here. On the slide here, you can see the existing Oliver Watson House sits on a 2.7 acre parcel. The existing home is the structure that's up on Waits Corner Road. There are 2 outbuildings behind it. We walked out there. We didn't do like a deep assessment, but they are in pretty tough shape. So in one of the schemes, you'll see we tried to show the idea of maybe those could be left alone, but the reality is they are, maybe you could salvage somewhat out of them, but they are, just wanted to make sure it was clear. There are some outbuildings, but we didn't sort of get too worried about them because of the condition that they appear to be in. For this site, we looked at a couple of options again. Unlike the other schemes, rather than starting with the highest density, we did the inverse, where we said, okay, this is a community, a context where the existing zoning for the lots around this lot are R20, which is to say they're 20,000 square foot lots. So one of the thoughts we had was, well, let's just start by testing out what could you do if you just were to subdivide this property into 20,000 square foot lots. And so the idea was that the Oliver Watson House itself could be basically carved off on its own 20,000 square foot lot. And then you could probably create an additional 4 house lots, configuring some sort of means of access to the lots that are a little bit further in. So the good news is, you get some additional homes than what is there currently. I don't know that the best path towards creating attainable workforce housing is creating additional 20,000 square foot lots, but we thought it was important to look at this, test this, understand this, give you, if nothing else, a sort of baseline to be thinking about against. So that was option A. Option B said, let's go back to the idea of the cottage court that we showed on South Road, where, again, single-family detached homes, just ones that are small-scale cottages. In option B, we preserve the existing home, but said maybe we make it up sort of like it's part of this new little pocket neighborhood. So it gets renovated, and then we incorporate a community green that sort of runs down through the middle of this thing. Some of the images on the right, the cottage courts we show, kind of have that effect, like the upper right-hand image. Those are all cottages that look into a sort of shared common green space, and then their parking sits back behind them off of these shared drives. One important consideration out here is that these don't have access to sewer, so you'd have to think about septic. So one of the strategies we often take is some of that community green space in the middle could actually host the septic treatment system sort of underneath the grass. So you'd have sort of a shared common lawn.
One system.
One system for all of the homes. So it'd be a shared system. And basically the sort of large triangular green at the top there is a pretty typical size I've seen for other sort of pocket neighborhoods we've done. Again, we've not done the engineering on it, but I think that's the approach. The septic would be treated as part of the common open space area. Incorporating the existing house and adding the cottages around it, this scheme shows basically 15 units. It's 14 cottages plus the existing house. And what the existing house becomes is a question too. It's pretty big, right? It was a senior living facility. So it could either be somebody's like 4 or 5 bedroom house, or it could be subdivided into smaller units. Potentially, I will say there's a big cost to that. That's one of the things we talked about when we were out there. I think you'll see in the other 2 schemes, one of the thoughts was carve it off, let somebody put a bunch of sweat equity into it, renovate it themselves, and focus these things more so on the other. So with that, I'll transition to the next scheme. So this one says the existing house is on its own 20,000 square foot lot, so you could potentially find somebody else to take care of that. And instead you put 15 cottages on what's effectively the just over 2 acres remaining portion of the lot. Again, incorporated green space that could be the septic. I will say you could certainly in this one flip it so that the green goes out toward Waits Corner, so you'd have a few less homes out on Waits Corner. I think what was one of the successful things of the previous scheme is from Waits Corner, there were only sort of 1 or 2 new structures, so it would still feel like only a couple of homes, with the court really being back behind there. You can see the parking is sort of consolidated, mostly towards the back in this particular scheme. And again, 15 cottages for this option. And then option D, kind of like on the other lots, we said let's do one where we sort of mix types. And so in this one we said maybe we do a similar number of units, so we're showing 16 units, but in this case only 4 of them are in cottages and 12 of them are in these smaller little manor house stacked unit buildings in the back. So maybe there's 12 one-bedroom units in the back and 4 three-bedroom cottages in the front. Again, the hope is that even those little 6-unit buildings don't feel like anything more than a big house, like some of the images on the right. I should point out the 2 lower images on the right, those are 2 buildings that are in Kingston that are multi-unit buildings. So it's kind of exactly what we're referencing as a precedent here. And again, with the parking distributed around the edge, and this one really lets us carve off the existing house and its outbuildings as its own, 1-acre parcel. I will certainly say that the members of the community that came out that lived in some of those houses really liked this scheme because it sort of consolidated the density on one half of the site. But again, keep in mind, depending on what kind of housing option you're trying to create, this does so because a lot of them are 1-bedrooms. Is this where you would expect 1-bedrooms, or would you really wish for more 2 and 3-bedrooms? So those are the things that need to be thought about and considered. Boards and commissioned, again, this one was very much a split vote. The Affordable Housing, the Historic District Planning Board all ranked option D as their top choice. I think they liked the variety and the fact that it was consolidated on sort of one portion of the lot, but still didn't present its density out on Waits Corner necessarily. Concom Economic Development leaned towards option A because of the fact that it was low density. This is more akin to what's in the surrounding community, although again, I think that works a little bit against the objective of potentially creating attainable housing for these sites. And bike ped sustainability, again, nice, more sort of broad comments, nothing that was specifically A versus B versus C versus D, with the exception that sustainability there was a comment in there that said that they thought D seemed like the best option, even though they didn't necessarily rank it that way in the numerical rankings. So, back to you guys.
So I have some comments just in general about the site. I have gone out there and just so people understand how the town got this property, it was donated by a woman who ran a care home for the elderly, and she donated it to the town so that it could be used for a similar purpose. Now, over the years, we have gone to court and we have removed that stipulation, and so we are free to use this piece of property however we want. However, having seen the woman's picture on the mantle, I felt touched by it, and it was very easy for me to imagine the house with elderly people there, and that is one of my passions. So I was excited to learn about a new 55 and older housing project that has just been broken ground in Portsmouth. That's done by the Aid Bethune. It's called the Aid Bethune House, and it's like in conjunction with the senior center. So to me, I would really like option D, and I would like it to be available to people that are 55 or 60 and older as affordable housing, because I feel that would be consistent with the original wish, just because that's just, I really felt touched by the picture and the woman's wish, so.
I agree. I think D is my preferred option. It gives us some additional building, but I'm trying to protect what neighbors sort of enjoy about that area. I definitely think we should sell the original home off, and someone, who wants to make an investment, and maybe that money can be used to help with some of the infrastructure costs for the other site. But I like D. It's 6 buildings, but it's the options, and I do agree it's a different flavor. It's 55 and up, where people might want to downsize. They want to leave, but they don't want to leave South Kingstown, and so that would be an option for many people. And I'm trying to just prevent a diversity so that we are addressing every need in the community. So I'm with you, Patty.
So I like D as well. I look at D and I see something similar to the project that's behind Peacedale School. I don't know if anyone's seen that here, but I just want to talk about a few others here. When I look at option C, I sort of see the Kingston Village Gardens there, across from Antonio's Pizza, sort of diagonal. That's sort of what I picture when I look at these, is something like trying to put context to it. I think D allows us really most bang for what we can do there, sort of most density, most units, most bedrooms. I do want to ask you further, it doesn't sound like we touched on, how many bedrooms can be put in the 4 cottages? Would those be a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom? And then in the stacked flats, can you clarify that?
Yes, I think they could be any number of things. I will say the stacked flats, you wouldn't typically do a larger family unit in them. So I would think you really would want those to be 1s, maybe 2-bedroom units. The cottages typically want to be more like a 2 or 3-bedroom unit. I will say one thing that I think is worth considering if you like this idea of it being thought of as 55 plus or senior. One of the ideas of the stacked flats is it's a 3-story unit, a 3-story building, and some of those units are on the 3rd floor, which starts to become something that, older folks start to worry about, right? So one of the scenarios we might consider here, let's keep talking it through, is there some kind of hybrid option where you aren't doing like a 3-story stacked flat scenario, but how are you combining smaller units into smaller buildings, but still with an eye towards, 55 plus as a potential user? Again, let's keep talking through all the scenarios. But to answer your question, I think the stacked flats really want to be 1s or 2 bedrooms. The cottages really want to be 2s or 3 bedrooms. That's not to say you can't build 1-bedroom cottages. It's not to say you can't do 3-bedroom stacked flats. It's just what you would typically expect to find for those building types.
I think maybe we should flesh out this 55 or older, type concentrated affordable housing here. Do we feel that's what we want to do here? Do we want to have it more diverse, meaning it's open to whatever age? I think we should maybe flesh that out before we just kind of go toward that. Well, I like having the option of all ages. I don't want to have to have this one sort of closed out to if you're under 55 and you're looking for a house and this is in your price range and there's really no other options. Well, that option's not there for you. So I'm not big on the 55 and over concentrated. I like just, diversity, open to all, and, just let the market play its way and whoever can get it, sort of get it, as opposed to, having to be over a certain age to get in there. That's my take, but we can flesh this out a little.
I think, number one, aside from the commitment to the woman who made the donation, I read the consent decree from the court action in 2002, I think it was. And the court did put a limitation on it that we can do what we want with the property, but whatever we do, the proceeds that we get from it have to go towards that, towards elderly housing issues in some fashion or other. So dedicating this to that type of development is sort of honoring the consent decree too. I kind of like the idea. I don't think we're required to, but it gives us one more option. And as you said earlier, we need everything.
So I like Councilwoman Berger's been kind of expanding on this all night, and I agree with her. I like that we're building a portfolio of different sorts of affordable housing, right? And so love my seniors. I think we should build more 55 plus affordable housing. I just would like the town to come back with us and say how many, or is there any projects right now that are being built in the town 55 plus? How many do we have? Come back there first, and if it's really like a super high need, which it probably is, then I would consider it in the future. I think it's a good idea, but I'm just not sold just yet. Doesn't mean I can't be persuaded.
So option D has 4 cottages, so that's adding 4 units total, and then there's 12 stacked flats. So that's 16, it's bringing on 16 dedicated to 55 plus, Rory. And then the math on the other side of the table, if you look at South Road and Wakefield, you could have, 50 is the hybrid of D with little less, right, and South Road. I don't know whatever that one. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, just a thought I have though. We can concentrate this one to 55 plus, but I don't think we have the authority to concentrate any area to be 54 or under. I don't think we have that authority.
No, we don't. But we could have this one, these 16 units be 55 and older.
Yes.
Because also the 16 units would be people that can sell their house and then return their house to the market so that families can buy a big house, and us old people that don't need big houses.
Speak for yourself.
There's 355
What do
and
they call
over
it,
here.
downsizing, right?
We're all
Downsizing.
55.
Yeah.
Right,
To
we
age in
need,
place.
there needs to be some place for older people, especially that don't have a ton of money. I mean, all of, like Peacedale House, the federal housing project behind where Job Lot used to be, they're all full, and they're extremely low income. So those places are like 30% AMI, 40%. So if you're like at 80% as somebody older, there's no place to go.
I will say that, you know, I live in Shadow Farm, and sometimes it feels like I live in a 55-plus community, right? I'm one of the youngest people in that community. And I think that Mr. President makes a good point. The market sometimes will dictate that it's in the best interest of 55-plus people to downsize and move into this, whether we mark it as 55-plus or not, or restrict it or not, right? I mean, it's going to be, if we have like option D, I think many people in South Kingstown who have big family homes that they've put their equity and sweat and blood into might say, hey, this is now our new opportunity to jump into a smaller home so we can downsize, right, and create that nest egg. So, you know, if we restrict it to 55 plus or not, I think people that are 55 plus are going to jump at this opportunity anyway. You know, you look at Shadow Farm, and my neighbors are mostly not millennials, right? They're baby boomers or silent generation, and they're great neighbors. Hi, neighbors.
What happens is, like, you buy it when you're your age, and then you become the great, you know, the people have probably been there for a long time, so you just get old.
Well, no, someone dies, and then they sell it,
So-
right? That's what happens a
In
lot
my-
of the times. Not to be morbid, but truly.
In my experience, when you talk to residents who have lived here a long time, they want to stay in South Kingstown, but there's not the right place to go to buy. So if you this is only 16 little spots. It's not a lot. We're going to make it potentially 50 at South Road and maybe another 20 in Wakefield. So you're talking about 10-15% of what we could create would be just for one little market. But I do think people want to downsize, but what people are looking for doesn't exist in town yet. We haven't, builders aren't building that. You know, it's not happening. So we need to try to create that. And I also think, you know, older people need housing in a way that, just as young, everybody needs housing. I take that back. The only tweak I would say is if you wanted to readjust your project, then maybe if it's a 3-stack, then the second floor and the first floor are 55 and up, and we do a hybrid, and the young people who have knees go to the third floor.
Yeah,
You know?
I was just going to suggest, if I could just quickly.
Well, I thought elevators would be,
Well,
I think it's cost prohibitive.
Yeah, it's pretty cost prohibitive.
Hundred-
Yeah. The second you put an elevator, you suddenly go, so let's put 40 units in that building, because I have to spread the cost of the elevator, but it is just, yeah. One thing I was going to suggest is the philosophy we've had so far tonight, which I think has been awesome, is thinking of every site as what its sort of unique potential is, and then how the three together provide all these scenarios to think about. I love that that's also creating the most homework for Eric, since he isn't here tonight. And so one of the thoughts I had was, if you want, again, we're going to meet again another time, if we just model that, if we think of this one as that 55 plus, I design a site that I think would make sense for something with that in mind. But then next time when we come back, we can debate a little bit the merits of that. What were the trade-offs that had or didn't have? Again, you don't have to decide tonight if that's the case. I will also forecast that when you guys even get into the RFP process, some of these things, you don't have to make absolutes. You can have like scoring criteria where you give bonus points if it's 55 plus, but you don't necessarily require it being 55 plus. So you still leave on the table the ability of a certain developer to say, I know you guys put that in, but I think ultimately for my market that doesn't make the most sense. Here's why, and it's on them to prove to you why that was their case. Whereas somebody else might say, no, that's exactly what I want. I'm glad that's something that you guys think is a priority, but not an absolute. So I just want to, for what it's worth, you guys don't have to debate this ad nauseum and make the final decision. You could still leave that open all the way through in a way.
I wanted to ask one more question about the differences between option C and D. It's essentially the house carved off with 1 acre or the house carved off with a little less than half an acre. Was there anything aside from having that half an acre to put more units in that went into that, making those choices or options?
I'm not sure I completely tracked the question, other than when we thought we would try a scheme that consolidated, it also made sense to maybe put more land into the house lot. That might not be what you were asking. Try again. Yeah.
It may be. Was there some rationale that you may need to sell the house with an acre as opposed to a little less than half?
Gotcha. Not necessarily. It really was thinking about, A, we're trying to put a couple different options on the table so you can see the range of things that could happen. B, if something came out of the woodwork where somebody screamed, you can't get rid of that outbuilding in the back, that's where Abraham Lincoln was born, or, you know, whatever, that at least there was an option on the table that preserved some of that possibility. I do think, obviously, that the neighbors like the idea that that kind of built in a buffer, but that's not to say that you couldn't use more of the lot, but just don't build homes all the way right up to that far corner, right? So there might be a hybrid where we do something in between these two, or you only build on 2/3 of the lot like D shows, but with cottages, you know, and the number ends up being 8 or something, right? Like that, we could do some other scenario in between, which is kind of what I was trying to think about. If I was to rethink of this as a 55 plus, but leaning towards option D, I might replace the stacked flats with something else and lose a little bit of density, but maybe there's a happy middle ground in there, or at least you could see that next time and decide if that made sense.
And Mr. Mayor, just to explain that one more, we also thought on that house, since it needs potentially a substantial amount of work, that adding acreage to it may make it more attractive. The other aspect, and this was brought up on option A, which is more of that single-family feel, which has 4 units. The planning board did discuss about taking option A and making those duplexes. Still have the single-family feel. You'd go from 4 units to 8 units, plus the house would be 9, but it would have more of a feel of a single family.
I actually thought of the other side of the coin, which is because I've been through that house, if somebody's going to buy it, as you said, there's going to be substantial renovations that they're going to have to put into it. It might be more affordable to somebody if they're only buying the half acre. Of the two, frankly, I think I prefer option C.
I know there's been a lot of talk too about could that offset some of the costs. Honestly, when I've seen properties like this in the past, it's not unusual to say, we'll sell it to you for $1. We just really want you to fix it up and bring it back to life. And, you know, if you're somehow thinking you're making $500,000 and expecting somebody to put in all the money that it would require, again, another topic for another time, but just for what it's worth. And that is a big project for somebody to tackle, even just to make it a single family home.
We could have a reality TV star, you know, remodel it for us, right?
We totally could.
Like the Gaines family, you know, reach out to them.
No, not them, but somebody.
Oh, somebody else, I mean,
So,
yeah, equivalent.
My question is about all the projects regarding design guidelines. Would we be able to have some sort of control about, yes? Because we didn't really talk, like, we're seeing pictures, but when it comes down to the subsequent phases, are we able to say, we would like the bell block look, we would like this look, we would like shingle style, we would like you to, right? Because I feel like...
yeah, I think that, and we even kind of made that a bullet point, but then I realized it was like almost even more in the weeds than we could probably get into tonight. But ultimately, yes, you could put any stipulation in the RFP you want. Again, like everything else, just keep in mind, if the ultimate goal is attainable housing, be careful of how much you ask for and how much you leave available for flexibility. That's where the scoring matrix is another great example, right? Like if you're willing to commit to building out of fiber cement instead of vinyl, for instance, there's like a higher tick on the scoring matrix, and then they can try to figure out how that balances out. But yes, I think you could, Jamie, back me up, include some kind of architectural standards of what the expectation is relative to material, finish, any number of considerations.
We did modify one of the slides earlier on to put an architectural feature into it, because everybody's view of nice may have different opinions of nice, vinyl sided versus hardy plank versus cedar versus other materials, whether you have a lot of fenestration, architectural detail on the homes. But again, all of that can be vetted and built into an RFP.
My one last question,
Sure.
just because it's your role when, I'm not quite clear on the scope of your work and when you sort of drop off, because I'm curious, are you going to be part of that helping with the RFP writing or the vetting or the whatever? I mean, I guess basically, how long do we have you for?
Right, so our scope was for the visioning and the community feedback, which is the one, we've got one more submission we want to do with you guys.
Okay.
Because again, in the end, what we were trying to do was sort of create the framework for these conversations. Getting into the RFP itself is another whole effort then beyond. So certainly Eric has done that for a lot of communities, like helped craft the RFPs. So I think our scope for this phase would basically conclude kind of at the next session or in a report we'll pull together following that session. We could be involved in that stage. Others could be, town staff could try to do it on their own. They probably don't want to, but.
Just to follow up on Jeremy's response, we have started discussions internally about next phases. Some of those decisions would have to be made after you went through this meeting, kind of this meeting of, is the town council on board? Which projects are moving forward? Are they comfortable with the RFP process? And then we'll work on the schematics of bringing that to fruition and any costs associated with that.
Which leads me to my question. Which option does not get a rose tonight for this? Meaning, sorry, it's a Bachelor reference.
Yeah, A is out.
A is out. Is B out as well?
I think we liked D. Is that right?
I didn't hear anyone talk about anything other than, I thought you liked B for a second, then you started talking only about D.
C for a second.
I think we talked about C and mostly D. Is that correct?
C, yeah. The difference, for me, the difference is C gives us a little bit more units, but D is
And there could
fine.
be an option that's between the two, which is what I was starting to try to advocate for.
So I think you hear.
So I could try to do
Yeah.
something that's the land of C, but consolidating a bit more like D, but maybe not as far as D if we want to try to do some types that might be a little more conducive to an older potential resident.
I think it would be really nice out there because it would be quiet, or, I mean, it probably, we're not going to be holding darties out there, that which we
you.
learned was the new word for
60
daytime
is the new
parties.
40.
Right, well, 60 is the new 40, but,
So we're not going to invite you to the Darty?
no, I want to go to the darty, I just don't want to host it.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Not on Pond Street.
I'm pretty sure when people our age show up, it stops becoming a darty.
My
I'm
last
pretty
question,
sure,
Mr.
yeah.
President, my last question, because we're at 8:37 right now. Do we need to make a next meeting, Mr. Manny? Do we need to have set up the next?
So when,
Oh, yeah.
we do want to open up the public comment, but just to sort of clarify that, when can we expect to have you back for another meeting to work through this?
Yeah, so we would need a little time to consolidate this stuff, bring Eric up to speed, let him do his homework. So I would, unless you have to pick a date tonight, I would say we could probably work with staff and figure out what makes sense, and they can talk
Yeah,
it
we
through with
can
you
work that
guys
out.
and see if
That
that's
sounds good.
okay.
Absolutely. I just think we're all
Okay.
excited to see what you come up with.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. It'll be in 2025. I can promise that much, but no, just kidding.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Jeremy. Great
Thank
work.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Now we're going to open up the public comment. Anyone who's here who wants to come and speak, come on up.
Okay. I'm just going to be very, very brief. I'm just looking at, because I have a lot of neighbors who ask about the South Road School, where all of our children used to go to school, and what's going to happen there. There's a lot of misinformation. So I'm very glad that you ruled out A, because that was a big, big concern for many of the people who live in my neighborhood. That really did not seem to fit with the character of the South Road area. And just looking at the other pictures, I think we were talking about, is it B and C? I don't have my phone right in front of me right now with but the other two options. And we were talking about the Frisbee and the hill in the back where all the kids slide, and still people go there to slide when we do have snow. Florida got it all, thank God, this year. But if I know the Frisbee field, and wouldn't it be nice to change it up a little bit for some of the people who play Frisbee golf, and maybe push a couple of those houses that are on South Road on both ends, and maybe push it back a little bit and put those houses there, and maybe make it a little bit more parking, so it would even be more of a setback and it wouldn't be seen. And I know we were talking about not touching the Frisbee, but there's plenty of room back there to move Frisbee around.
Like
And-
these houses?
Yeah, right on South Road. There's two of them right by the green space, or two or three, maybe two on each side. the daycare and the other, both the daycare side and the other side. So at the both openings, I was thinking about maybe pushing them back so nobody sees them even there. Add a little bit more to where the Frisbee area is, and then add a little bit more parking. So when we do have those snow days, that there'll be some parking back there for some people to go and not bother the people who are, living there at that point. Just an idea as I was looking at it. I'm just trying to hide it from the people who have to come out and see it from those entranceways and make it, still accessible to the people that is just a hill for sliding. And I'm not really too concerned about the Frisbee when we can move Frisbee to other parts of that park. Just an idea. Secondly, I always thought the next piece with Wakefield Elementary is that it's always been a commercial downtown, and I really like the idea of having the commercial part and the living above, because again, that's our tax base in our town, and we can still get some tax money off of it, and still have affordable and health offset both of them. So I really like that idea. And when I was on the council many, many years ago, we were drilled about the Oliver Watson home, that it is for senior, and the money that came from that will go to senior, and the decree that did come down was saying, to have the money put back into the senior. And I think that idea of the 50, I was sitting there thinking about it, and then it came up as a topic of conversation, which I was very happy to hear. I want to reiterate that that would be a very good use of that land, and there are a lot of people whose kids have all grown up that probably do want to downsize and more families could come in. I'm not saying for the affordable part of it, because most of these houses are going for big money, but at least it's a spot for some people to be able to afford to live in the town and stay here as older seniors on first floors, because we all know our knees start to go and our backs, and people just can't do the stairs. So thank you. It was a very informative meeting, and that's all I wanted to add. All right.
Thank you, Kathy.
If I was on the council, I'd be making the same decisions as you. Yes, if you can. All right. All right, I'm going home. Monday night was meeting on the medical school, possibly it being at URI. Last night was South County Hospital, and tonight's affordable housing. So I'd like to go home and get some sleep now. Tomorrow's something, too. Tomorrow's the State House, yeah, but that's, I'm talking local stuff now, local. All right, everybody, thank you.
Good evening. I also want to comment on her comment about the disc golf course. I'm a disc golfer. Are you a disc golfer?
I am.
Well, in Curtis Corner, yes, it's a good point that she made about getting the houses away from there, because that's the convergence of 3 different holes on the disc golf course. And not everybody is really good at getting a disc in a straight line, and they're dangerous. They go at high rates of speed, and they go very high. And they're not called Frisbees, they're called discs. They come in all different weights, and I disc golf, but I'm not that good. But I know that I could hit one of those houses very easily if I was there playing. So to keep the houses away from the convergence and the the sledding hill would be a great idea, because actually one of the holes goes right across that sledding hill. So for that. And my other comment was going to be about the Wakefield Elementary School. And I'm so glad to hear you guys all talk about green space and how important it is. There isn't a lot of green space in Wakefield. I moved here permanently 6 years ago. And I have to say, where I came from was incredibly green. And then when I got here, and it's like, wow, there's just no place for people to go to gather. And so I feel the park downtown is really important, Saugatucket Park, to keep as a green resource. So I am from a member of the Wakefield Concert Band, and I joined here 6 years ago. And we are desperately in need of space, permanent space to rehearse and to store. We have like 5 file cabinets. It's a 100-year-old organization. We have 5 file cabinets full of band music. We need a place for storage. We need a place to rehearse. And wouldn't it be great if there was an amphitheater, a performance stage in Saugatucket Park? I can envision it right back against the river and performing out. And it's a place for people to gather, for our community to gather. It would be beautiful, right in central Main Street. All you'd have to do is walk across to go to the Main Street and to have your meals be part of the community, it would be a wonderful, wonderful addition to Saugatucket Park. And we need some space, so I was wondering if we could kindly consider us when you are developing the business end of that. A performance space would be roughly 20 by 40. There are 60-plus musicians in the band, and it is growing, and we are constantly out in the community trying to, get more people to come in. We do 6 free concerts every summer in different spaces now. And it's all free to the community. We have 300-plus people at each concert, and they just absolutely love it. It's so wonderful to see families with picnic baskets and older people bringing chairs, and it's just wonderful. I have tried to expand where we perform because there are a lot of senior citizens in the organization, and right now in Marina Park, which is our home base, they have to carry a lot of equipment and instruments across the grass, sit in chairs in the uneven ground, and I really worry about it. So I've gotten 3 different places for us to play now in town. One is the Town Beach. That was a big hit last summer. We had Irish step dancers and musket people doing the 1812 Overture, and it was awesome. And it was such a big hit that now they're going to try and run a concert series right from the Town Beach every summer. So we're going to be back there again. This summer we're bringing bagpipes, which will be fun. And then the other place we're going to play this summer is the Trolls. Have you been to see the Trolls in Charlestown?
We wish they were in South Kingstown.
Yeah, I know. Oh, I have to go someplace where there's a platform for my seniors. This is what I'm looking for. I'm afraid of them falling. But anyway, Greta and Eric will be, there's a pavilion right next to the Trolls, and we're going to play there. So if we had a place in the center of downtown, I think we could bring it. It's not just for us. That stage would not just be for us. It would be the whole community. You could have theater. You could have things during the day for the kids. You could have concerts at night. You could be utilizing this amphitheater all the time. And it's right in the center of downtown. And I'm loving that you guys are thinking green and you're thinking community, because that's what we're about. And if you could be so kind as help us with our vision to have a central location in our own town. We've been here for 100 years, but we don't have a place to be. We share the high school and all of their things. We share their room, we share their equipment, and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, if you should be so kind as to help us with our vision. I went to a town, I was going through towns in Georgia last year, last February, and in the middle of nowhere, you would come across this little town that had, the first thing that we'd see is this huge amphitheater, and I can send you pictures, and I will. And you could just envision a whole hillside full of people in this little teeny town, and we kept on finding these things in these little towns, and I said, why doesn't our town have this? Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For the town clerk, would you just give your name? 'Cause I think
Oh, sure, Bridget Gilchrist.
Bridget Gilchrist. Thank you.
Good evening, Taylor Ellis, longtime South Kingstown resident. I wanted to voice my support for residential development at these 3 sites. I think the greatest need in our town is rental housing, and I think it needs to be focused from extremely low-income people, 30% or less, up to the 80% mark of the AMI. There's almost no affordable year-round rentals available, and the greatest need is for the households who are furthest away in terms of income from the high prices for any rentals that would be available and are definitely priced out of home ownership in South Kingstown, given the land values and the house prices. I don't support public subsidy for households or for developments that are aimed at AMI over 80%. Be it a financial subsidy through use of bond funds or other, forms of financial subsidy into projects, or, density bonuses, or, like what we're trying to do with the limited town land that is available for projects like this. Because there's such a limitation, I think we need to focus on the people of greatest need. So putting subsidy towards somebody who is making more than the average AMI in town to subsidize their home, to me, does not really make sense in terms of limited funds, limited density bonuses that you're going to want to give out in town for housing, for the affordable housing. And so I think it should be focused on up to 80%. The town also obviously needs to look at, other sites, and I do appreciate what the councilwoman said, that there are other things in the pipeline. But, finding sites is key. Once you find a site, you can find developers and you can move forward. Who knows the town better than our town leadership, our town staff, and people within the community. So finding these sites is obviously key. And I think, certainly there's a need for a studio and one bedroom, but I think because of our zoning practices, over the years, we've seen a decline in students, in our schools. We need to, as much as possible, have 3-bedroom units so we can attract families, because that's been, families, students aren't in our schools because of the practices that we've had in terms of zoning, making land values so high that go with the single-family homes that have been built. So I would say really focus on rentals. That's where you can get the biggest bang for your buck, as someone was saying. That's what we should be trying to do. And there is obviously needs in all of these different buckets. But I think with limited sites and limited resources, you have to really, kind of look at what can we do to have the biggest impact in our community. And I do live down the street from one of the proposed sites, and I certainly, that's a support, there's a development there at the Oliver Watson House site. And I think, one other thing, if you write into your RFP that you want to have lower incomes as a real component of these developments, there are greater federal and state subsidies out there for capital project costs, because you are focusing on the people with the greatest need. If you're looking to do things 80 to 120, there's going to be much less subsidy opportunities for the developer. And so you can actually, it can actually benefit the project. And then there's ways to then going forward to project-based, housing choice vouchers in the project. So the operating funds are there, or like the rent revenue is bolstered by having the project-based housing choice vouchers. These are all things that good nonprofit developers can do and bring to the table. And I think that we can really create great projects with, so great architects, that almost everyone in the community would be very proud of. But thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Colin Penny, South County Habitat. Great to see you all again so soon. So just a couple of things that I heard pop up that I just wanted to clarify. And again, I'm definitely coming from a nonprofit developer lens. It's very different for for-profit developers, whether they're doing affordables or not. It's just a very different picture. As far as splitting the lot into multiple nonprofits, it's very, very difficult because the funding revenue and the streams, each individual agency would have to invest their own thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to get that through Rhode Island Housing or HRC or whoever is handing out funding soon, and it really complicates it. I would say if you want something that's both homeownership and rental, it's very doable, but what you would do is award it to one developer. And so that developer could develop both homeownership units and rental units, and then sell off the homeownership units to their program and potentially sell off the rental units to a Johnny Cake Center, a women's development, or whoever to then manage those rental units. So that would probably be a much cleaner way if you did want to do both homeownership and rental, but you'd have one developer who would partner with different agencies to make that happen. When you're looking at both those B and C, I think they're both great designs. Again, I would stay away from triplexes. I always like more density, but in Rhode Island, triplexes bring up a lot of different fire codes. The Rhode Island building code is very sketchy on triplexes, as well as homeowners insurance. It could be a lot more expensive the more units you have within one building to insure it. And when you're looking at affordability, we're seeing homeowner insurance as one of the biggest driving costs for homeowners right now. Duplexes are a lot more doable. Single families a lot more doable. When it comes to the number of bedrooms, I know Jamie's going to get you some great data. I can tell you in the 7 years I've been here, we average 1.71 kids per household. And that's pretty typical across the country, whether you're looking at affordable housing or not. So we're seeing smaller households traditionally. I'd say typically we usually see either one child per household or 4 children per household. And that's just kind of what we've seen. And it does vary a lot. One of the nice things, if you design your house as well, particularly capes, one of the great things about capes, and we're doing it in Westerly, so we designed, out of our 22 houses, 8 are designed as 4 bedrooms, but they're capes. So we designed them as 4 bedrooms because we're using septics, we had to design for the maximum load. But if when we go to the seller, if they only need a 2-bedroom, you could put a door at the top of the cape and not finish it, you have a 2-bedroom, and you're not having the expense of finishing the top floor. But you're still having the same footprint, whether you're doing it as a 2-bedroom, a 3-bedroom, or a 4-bedroom house. It just depends on how much you finish. And you can get a CO by putting a door at the top of the stairs on a cape. And it also allows younger families to expand. So if we build a house and there's, say, a couple and a child, we might only finish the 1 bathroom in the 2 bedrooms on the downstairs. But if they ever need to expand, they could go up. The plumbing, everything's set up to put a second bathroom potentially and up to 2 more bedrooms in there. It's just a amount of sizing your load, whether it's septics or going into the sewer system. You would do it for the maximum load, but you could use the same footprint and same design for a 2, 3, or 4 bedroom in that way. So I think that's a great way to do it. When it comes to the RFP, I know pretty pictures say a lot of words, and Jeremy does a great job. Union Studios designed 4 houses that we built up here on Old North Road, pro bono. So if you guys ever want to get involved again and get some free time, let me know. And the houses are beautiful. They're great. We use that same design in Exeter. Oftentimes, what looks beautiful on paper is very difficult to build. I believe Rich was putting a single piece of siding on a roof in the snow in Exeter for about 8 straight hours one day because it was between 2 dormers around a tricky roof line. And there are certain design aspects that are just more expensive and they might look great. But I think leaving it open and putting as few design details in the RFP and let the developer really show you what they can do and making your decisions whether that's something that you like or not. The other thing that we have to contend to is Rhode Island Housing's design guidelines. You have a great cottage development ordinance here. A lot of that stuff doesn't meet the new design standards, or some of the suggestions in that ordinance doesn't meet the new design standards for Rhode Island Housing. So we're always trying to compete against multiple points of view, and so that could be extra tricky. I think allowing the developers, whether nonprofit or for-profit, to kind of give you their best shot of what they think will look great, is feasible, is cost-effective, is really the great way to do it. And I want to take out some other folks on the AMI. So I also sit on the board of the Affordable Housing Land Trust for Rhode Island. They monitor many of the units down here, most of the units in the state for home ownership units. What we find is most for-profit developers are building houses up to 120% AMI. And they're pricing them to sell at 120% AMI. Most of the buyers are less than 80% AMI. So they are cost burden when they're buying this affordable housing unit because they're able to get a loan. A lot of banks have forgotten about 2008 and are lending a lot riskier loans out. So what does that happen? When you're putting this individual or family at higher risk of foreclosure because they're buying a house they really can't afford because the developer is incentivized to sell it for as much as possible. I completely understand having to cover your costs, but the buyer's getting in, they're getting a loan. Home ownership is also expensive even if you have an affordable mortgage. I bought my house for the first time home buyer about 4 years ago, and I can't believe how much it's costing me outside of my mortgage to keep up a house. By a power washer and keeping it clean and gardening and everything else. And what you're going to find is if you're selling a 120% AMI house to somebody who's making under 80%, which is probably what will happen in a lot of these cases, the houses won't be kept up as well because they don't have the discretionary income. So I really think looking at 100% AMI max, we prefer 80 for home ownership is really the way to go. And it is feasible. It is financially possible. It is tight. Don't get me wrong. I lose millions of dollars on every project I do. But I think if you're really looking to serve the bulk of your community, I mean, if you look at the median income of somebody who works in this town hall or in our school systems and you double it, you still can't afford a house in this town. So, we see that most of our buyers are working in the hospitals, working in the schools, our managers at our hotels and restaurants. We have tons of URI employees and staff living in our housing. And so, that is workforce housing, whether you call it affordable, whether you call it the missing middle, and that is under 80% AMI. And that's really what we're seeing is the driving need. And I just briefly wanted to touch base on Wakefield Elementary. I think mixed use is great. I think potentially focusing on businesses that don't occupy it, that are kind of 9-to-5 businesses. It'll help you with your parking issues, so you can get more residents in there. And things that services of folks who they need it. They can always walk across the bridge over to Wakefield and get to the restaurants and bars and some of the other shops. But daycares, Head Starts, community health centers, those sort of businesses that have hours when folks are working, so that the parking lots will open and allow you to open it up to more housing, and folks will have some of those resources right there. The other thing I wanted to say about the 55 and older housing, we know it's a need. If you talk to Russ Partridge at the Warm Shelter, the highest growth in his is folks that need a shelter over 65. I will say from a moral perspective, I have an issue. It's illegal to discriminate by age, but for some reason we've been allowed to do it for people who are over a certain age, just not under. So it is tricky. It hasn't gone to many courts yet. I don't see it going to courts anytime soon. But I think just from a moral issue, it is tricky. The vast majority of deed-restricted housing in South County is for 55 and older. I don't know what it is in South Kingstown. I'm guessing it's a lesser percentage because you do have the Great Housing Authority and a lot of units there, with a small amount, I think maybe 14 are 55 and older. Megan, I'm sure, has all the exact numbers, but if you look at Westerly, it's like 2/3. If you look at South Kingstown, it's like 90%. It was seen as the palatable way to deed-restrict houses. And that's what it came down to for a long time. It was a lot more palatable to deed-restrict houses for folks 65 or older, for towns for a long time. So I think it's a huge need, but I also think we need to look at housing as a whole and what's right and ethical. So just something to think about as you're going through the decisions. But as always, I'm available. Let me know. Give me a call. Thank you.
Thank you.
Megan Sparks. That is why I let Colin go first, because he pretty much said everything I would like to. The one thing I want to add is that right now, last time we checked, and I don't know if Brian has new numbers on this, but 75% of the affordable housing in our town was for elderly, right? So we have Peacedale House, we have Peacedale Estates, we have Village Gardens, Indian Run. But for affordable housing for families, all we have is Fournier and Champaign Heights. So I know that we're redeveloping that as well. But we had a meeting last week with Narragansett Affordable Housing, South Kingstown Affordable Housing, and URI. And it was a great meeting, and one of the people in the audience here came up, Kai, and he asked, what do I say to South Kingstown in terms of, I'm young, I have nowhere to live, there's nowhere to go. And unfortunately, I didn't answer this then, but the fact of the matter is we don't have any one-bedroom studio units available, affordable for anyone. So although I think there's a need in all categories, I think that I am very hesitant. I mean, I know in affordable housing we talk about this all the time. We really did not want to suggest putting any 55 and older age restrictions on it, because the town, we really do need everything. And I am a believer that, Rory and Jay, I think that the market will dictate what we get. So I think discriminating like Colin said, which really is kind of what's going on against people under 55 and under. I think that we are against that. But that's it.
Thank you.
Good evening, Rich Morrissey. We might as well keep the Habitat theme going with a few comments. So they covered most of what I wanted to say. I do want to I don't know who the first woman was that spoke, but I want to counter her comment. I think these developments should be seen. We're not building housing to hide. We're building housing to build community. So my opinion is as Colin said, we're bringing people of all types who live in here and people who don't live here that want to live here. I don't want to come by a home that my neighbors don't want to see. I want to come by a home where I feel like I'm in a community. So I think we need to be very cognizant of building natural barriers on roadways and around communities so they feel like they're walled off, right? Let's think progressive. Let's think mixed. We're all the same individuals in this room tonight. We have different needs, different incomes, and we need to serve them, but we shouldn't isolate them. So I think that's a very important feature in what we think about as town and community going forward. The second, and Colin touched on it a little bit, in terms of number of bedrooms, we do have some needs for 4-bedroom homes. Single parents sometimes, but 4-bedroom homes. Dual parents sometimes, 2, 3, 4-bedroom homes. So as we think about traffic flow, a lot of the homes we build are for single parents in Habitat. Most of them, some have 2 adults, but most have 1. So when you think about the number of cars, and most of the kids are too young to be driving. So when we think about traffic flow, you may eventually get more traffic, but you're not going to get double the density with the number of people based on number of bedrooms. So I think that's something to consider as we think about parking need and we think about traffic flow, because you can't study that because it won't be there until after we populate the facilities. And then I guess the third thing I would reiterate is around AMI. I think we have to think more lower than upper. I think the 120, it's been commented on a couple of people, I think that's too high. The reason people can't live here is because they don't have 120% of an AMI to live here. They have less. So I think we need to think about those types of incomes that are less. And as you said, most of those people come with kids. Good for business, populates our schools, right? Hopefully it brings the numbers up versus down and gives us more longevity. So those are the only points I wanted to make about the plan. But otherwise, I think it's fabulous work. I think there's a great opportunity for us to move forward as a community and bring more people into it versus drive more people out of it.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Susan Marcus. I sit on the Economic Development Committee, and this was very interesting. I'm not going to comment really on any of them except the Wakefield Elementary School, but I do have a couple of questions for the town council. I asked this of Eric Bush when he was here before. What have you done to assess what the demand is? Everybody says everybody needs everything, but do you know what people in this town earn? Do you know how many of the people in this town earn that amount of money? It would have been very helpful, I think, for this whole process if we'd come to this with a clearer understanding of what the economic needs are. And the Economic Development Committee has talked about trying to do a survey to sort of find what the workforce requirements are, but we haven't actually gotten around to that. We have done a survey. Oh, wait, before I go on to that, the other thing I'd like to say about affordability is the more parking you have, I don't know whether you know how much a parking space costs, but Jeremy said, oh, you can't put an elevator in, it's really expensive. Well, I'd like to say every time you say there are 2 parking lots for some of these dwellings, that's very expensive, and that's land that's kind of, the oil from the underneath the car, it's going to wash into the grass. It's all kinds of things that are not good. So one of the things the town could do is it could think about changing its parking regulations, and that would be very helpful if that came from the town council. And the other thing I want to say before I go into the elementary school is that the EDC for years, at least 10 years, has been trying to get the town to rezone either as a what do you call it, overlay, or just completely rezone the commercial highway district. We could have, for years, have had affordable rental housing built in there. We had property owners 5 and 6 years ago who told us they wanted Old Tower Hill Road, the Wakefield Mall area, they wanted it to look more like Main Street, but they wanted mixed use. They wanted mixed use. They've told us mixed use is what we want. We could put a whole lot of people in there if we didn't have just 30% of the coverage of those spots as the zoning rule. And where is the town in terms of trying to get this to happen? Here we are talking about these sites, and we should have been talking, that's great, but we could have been talking about Old Tower Hill Road for a long time, and I'd really like to ask you to do that, because I think that would make a big difference. So I just want to say one thing about Wakefield Elementary School. We had, when it first came up, we had the hope that perhaps you could put a second story on it, so you could keep all the school and put stories on it to make it housing above, but we were told that wasn't feasible, given the kind of building it is. But while you debate all this, the Economic Development Committee is very interested in finding and testing the market for the kind of people, the woman from the band who wants, she wants auditorium space. She came on a tour we did with the school department. She wants storage space, auditorium space. It already exists in that building, and that building is sitting empty. That building is not getting any better sitting empty, and the Economic Development Committee is very keen on seeing whether we have a survey, which we've given, I believe, to you, and we'd like to see that survey. We'd like to be able to release that survey, send it around to a bunch of people and find out whether they're interested in using that building until the determination is made what is going to happen to that building. We could have, there are people who have told us they want storage space, they want extra space, they want performance space, they want all kinds of things, and we could be using that space. It would offset the cost for the town. We haven't been able to figure out what the town does pay for it now, but it's in the order of $60,000 to $80,000 to keep it heated. You could charge small rents and meet a market need, because there is a market need for small rent commercial property, and we could just do that, and we could enliven that whole space, and you could eventually come to have Jeremy design you something that looks like the Bell Block building. But for the interim, for the 3 to 5 years it's going to take you to get around to that, if South Road is any indication, it's going to take you a lot longer than 3 years to get around to it. We could be actively using that space. So I would just like it very much if the town council would take a little bit more interest in finding some other ways to use some of the assets we do have in town. I think that's about all I want to say, because I thought you did a fine job commenting on all these things, but I just want to add to your workload if I possibly can. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We did on Monday's meeting talk about the report that it's in a draft form on Old Tower Hill Road.
Oh, yes. Now that is a very good example of how we did that. We had a lot of excitement about that. Big community. One thing about this community is that people come out to these meetings. There are not many people here tonight, but people come out when they say, we're going to have a planning meeting, we're going to do a charrette, we're going to look at these things. People come out, they care. There's a lot of energy in this community. We did that with Healthy Places by Design. We have a lot of ideas as a community, and then they sit. That report has been with the planning department for months, and Jason King, we haven't heard anything back from it, and we were all excited about that, and he was talking about that, changing the zoning so that it would be form-based, and you would give different ideas to people. Now the People's Bank is going to move, and build something, and they're going to be under the old rules because the town has not changed the rules, so they're only going to be able to cover 30% of their building. Now, I think that would be, apparently they said, well, we have security reasons why we can't have a bank and housing, but that's ridiculous because you live in any city and there's a bank on the first floor and there's housing above it, so I don't know what's so special about that. But that's one, and then the Chipotle, when Scott Halberg did that thing there, he could have done something different. I don't know what's going on with Perry Rasso and the Feet First, but I think he wanted to house some of his staff above it, and he couldn't do that because the parking regulations were such that he couldn't possibly have a restaurant and people housing there.
Yeah, that,
We'd rather you not speculate on those matters like that.
Okay, but I'm just saying, there are some things that would really be helpful if you would attend to them.
so that report that you were anxiously awaiting is being reviewed, and
I
we are...
have it now. I think
We
I
don't
have it.
have, we don't have the Down City East. I want to say Able City East, but it's Down City East.
So Jason King was at a meeting with the planning board in November. We released the document internally in December to staff. It was reviewed for a little over 4 weeks internally. We released it last Thursday to the planning board, so it's a public document now. And we have Jason King on the docket for, I think it's February 4th. 11th.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could we get
to
it?
come back.
We understand. So we can take,
And discussion will be had at the next council meeting regarding that, which was continued from the last meeting.
Correct.
and we can take up a conversation at a future meeting about parking regs, because we can figure out where we're going to put that through the pipeline, because that was something that was talked about when we talked about Old Tower Hill Road. So,
And also the missing middle housing study that was done like 3 years ago. I sent an email about that today. There was another.
There is one?
There was a missing middle study that was done by the Affordable Housing Committee in 2020, I believe, and there was a lot. It probably just has been overlooked because a lot of stuff happened in 2020, but it sounds like we maybe need to review a lot of things that are with somewhere.
Well, that would be very important for Eric Bush. He needs, before he can really help you understand what this is going to cost, he needs to have some hard information on who needs and what they... who needs-
Exactly.
Yeah, so,
Right.
so find that and...
Yeah,
and
I
get-
just
get
sent
that
an
to
email
these-
about that today, so.
Good. Okay.
So there's definitely some things that we need to revisit on that, I think.
Good, okay, thank you.
and I'm just not clear if Wakefield School has been cleared out by the school department so we technically don't have ownership
You
of that
don't-
building.
Yeah, it could be that it's still, well, you could ask, I think, but anyway.
I think we have asked for them to remove dumpsters full of things, correct? There's lots of trash there. There you go.
Yes.
Okay.
Folks, it's 9:15,
Well,
so...
Thank you. We would like to send our survey out and see what the interest is. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Brett Harrington, Wakefield. The good thing about me is I'm 5 seconds. Anyway, you guys, Oliver Watson, I can't agree more. You have to honor the person that donated that land. If there was a day where I had money to donate a piece of land to this town, I'd be rolling in my grave knowing they went and they sued or whatever they did to get that flipped. How dare they? Because if you said at the time to the lady, yeah, okay, take it, and then we're going to take it to court, are you kidding me? Yeah. So exactly. 55 and over, whatever she designated, that's what that land needs to go to. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's not the way that happened.
Well, I wasn't here, but I mean, just say, all I heard was just a part where, she donated land and, they took it to court, you know what I mean?
It did, I wasn't here either. It did operate as elderly housing for many years. It also reached a point where the town couldn't continue providing the services to meet the Department of Health's requirements for elderly housing, for essentially nursing home care.
And just
And
briefly,
then that's when they went to court and said, what do we do? It's not, we were trying to. Yes, no, there was no effort at that. It was, this was a gift, what do we do? And the judge said, you can abandon the use, but you have to use whatever proceeds you get if you sell it for this purpose.
and it seems like, the flavor up here is to truly consider 55 plus, right? I mean, absolutely. I just want to, Thank you. Hi, Kai.
This the one? Yes, wonderful. Thanks for allowing me back here. I mean, not like you can stop me, I guess, but at any rate, I know it's late, so I'm going to try and speed through everything I'd like to say as fast as possible. Just few thoughts in no hyper-specific order. One, I would like to say that I am one person here tonight that is a member of a very specific demographic. I'm a 21-year-old URI student, but I'm also here, and I don't want to be too prescriptive, but I'm also speaking on behalf of all of my friends and family that couldn't be here for one reason or another. Big reason, same as the reason why Eric's not here, they're mostly sick, unfortunately. It's that time of year. But also, with that being said, of course, again, I don't want to be too prescriptive, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. Something I have noticed is that we've made a point a few times at different meetings that SK is the largest town in Rhode Island by sheer land size, and one of our...
Only at low tide.
Only at low Yeah, second largest, okay. Yeah, exactly, can't wait for that. Actually, on that note, my housemate did his senior project for high school was a history brochure, a satirical one on South Kingstown, and something he noticed looking at satellite imagery was that on the East Matunic State Beach, the coastline had actually rescinded by like a dozen feet or so, like there was just less beach, it was closer to the, but at any rate, that's neither here nor there. We have a lot of, and this is kind of a state and national trend as well, where we tend to develop more single-family units than we do medium and high-density housing. When we're trying to get as many units out there as possible and use our spaces efficiently as possible and make sure things are affordable, and just generally, I'm not an urban designer, but generally, if you're trying to design a town or a place, having as many people within reason as possible occupying a space, again, within reason, not saying like cram everyone together in like bunks and stuff, but that's like the real missing middle, I feel, of this town. We have some good examples of some areas. Duplexes are kind of one very far end of the spectrum. They are like a higher low density, but you'll have like townhouses are an excellent example. We have a few of those around, and I think they really add to the local character, and they're efficient. I think that could be especially pertinent in places like, in Wakefield, you're gonna have a bigger unit. All of these places are gonna look a bit different, but another kind of, this is sort of related, is when you have a place that, I'm going to talk about Wakefield for a moment. We talked about cars a lot and parking. Something I will note is, I have a question actually before I ask, which is anyone here like extremely acquainted, or I shouldn't say extreme, but fairly acquainted with using the RIPTA, the public bus? Yeah, so, and I use it all the time. Yeah, nice.
On it today.
What's that?
I was on it today.
Awesome. I take it almost every day. The bus line does go through, it goes right down High Street, it's Route 69. Something to consider is that when you have a higher density of housing, say you have a family of 2 kids and 2 parents. Some places you might have a car for each person. As like the kids age, they also get a car. So there's 4 cars for the total household. When you have infrastructure like that, which Wakefield is it's a great thing that it's near, it kind of takes the burden off of that necessity. It's not like people are going to live with no cars, we live in America, but when you have that, when you have walkable downtown areas that people can go to from, like, I forget who exactly said it, but that, like, Wakefield especially could be like a nexus for people going into the small businesses that are nearby. And on that note as well, I am a fan of the mixed use. I think something that we're starting to lose as development goes on is the things like the Bell Block and other places where you have a business on the first floor and then people living above it. It's just, like, when I say all these things, I'm looking at like efficiency and comfort in living. Both of these things are maximized when we're able to do these things. Maximize our density, maximize the efficiency of the use of our land. And on the note that someone said about Old Tower Hill Road, I have a friend that calls it like the Bald Hill of Wakefield. You can see where they might be coming from for that. So that's an interesting note to bring up, of that making Main Street and Old Tower Hill Road into like one big like East Greenwich situation where it's more of like a continual stretch. It feels more like a highway when you get to Old Tower Hill Road, sort of. There's a lot of great things going for it, the crosswalks, the bike lanes. I work in the Wakefield Mall, so I'm extremely familiar with that road. But just a few quick more notes, because I know I'm kind of rambling, but I do envision like Wakefield being you're going to have more 1 to 2 bedrooms and maybe some studios or whatnot than South Road. Maybe we'll have the 2-3 bedrooms, etc. I had another friend, I have a lot of anecdotes from people from my little bit of life experience I have, the 21 years of it, where he called, he was originally lived in Rose Hill, and he called Wakefield the city, and I laughed at that. I thought it was funny, but he kind of had a point that it's like sort of like a quasi-urban center. So when you have young people like me that are going out into the workforce or that work in this town already, they're going to want to be near the businesses they work in. I have friends that work at places in town. They would like to be able to live near the places they work. Even if those are lower income jobs, it'll still draw in a lot of business. So it's still a good thing overall. And I'll also make the point that when we're looking at AMI, I feel we should go for the broadest distribution of wealth as possible, from 60% to a few 120%. Of course, there seems to be a greater need for the lower end of the spectrum, but if you have like all 100% AMI, for example, people tend to get isolated into pockets, and they don't know what it's like to live with their fellow person, their neighbor that doesn't make as much money as them or makes more money than them. Something I don't like about Champaign Heights, for example, is that it feels isolated from the rest of the community. Like, we should feel a sense of community based by, I'm parroting kind of what you said earlier. You all basically said, that's why I let everyone speak first, because you know way more than me. And I'm not presenting anything here as objective either. This is just like food for thought. These are my thoughts as a person that has lived in this town his whole life and will continue to do so for at least a little bit of time. I am very grateful that we are having this conversation and it is in this positive light, because I initially didn't even think about staying in this town. It wasn't even a thought to me because it was just so out of the realm of possibility. But now it seems like there's a little bit of potential, at least for the people that really, really need it, potentially, a few of them, to stay here, be able to work here, and all of that good stuff. And one last note about the Oliver Watson property is I don't have any particularly strong thoughts about the use of the elderly housing and whatnot, because as the stipulation of the property is that the proceeds would go to the cause anyways. So to me, like, whatever happens, I don't feel strongly about. But I will say that you might be able to, each place will have its own character, I imagine, and maybe in the Oliver Watson house you have places that are, they're multi-unit buildings, but they have more of the character of like maybe the colonial houses in like Shannock or Kenyon, which is not SK, but or like some of the like big barns that got transformed into houses. Like I don't know anything about design. There's costs that go into this. There's fire code stuff, insurance, all of that, and that can make things like, it's not a clear-cut answer. I'm not saying that it is, but
Kai, a lot of great input.
Yeah, I'm going to stop. That's it, because I'm going on and on. So I'll leave it to
Thank you.
Yeah.
I do just want to state, Mike Marin did have to step away. He had to attend a family emergency, so he is gone for the evening. Just want to make that public.
Good evening, Maria Mack, Planning Board, and it is now 9:30, an hour past when I know this meeting was supposed to end, and I'm always very cognizant of everyone's time. Just wanted to touch on a couple of things without getting into a lot of detail. As you folks discussed, the Planning Board in the survey, it really didn't create the ability for us to expand on some of our thoughts. Certainly, the board in its entirety felt that the Olmsted Park is a very important place for South Kingstown. It's our version of Wilcox Park. And just like we wouldn't put housing on the Peacedale Village Green, we feel that there may be potential for other uses. And as you folks have said tonight, it may be sort of the lowest in terms of priority of the three potential projects. Monday night, you had a couple of folks from the Wakefield Village Association who spoke about the potential for integration with Main Street and use of that park, and that was very nice to hear. As mentioned earlier, there are other opportunities. Old Tower Hill Road, a very important project for all of us that had huge community support in the 5-day design studio that was held last fall, and hopefully we can continue with that, because that is an opportunity. Putting housing in that area will help to stimulate act as a catalyst for that area and stimulate also other types of economic growth. So we're really trying to put a lot of effort into that. I certainly appreciated Councilwoman Alley's comments about the 55 and older for the West Kingston property. Looking back historically at that, and of course we try to be very sensitive as to how we characterize different demographics in town, but that's certainly a need. We have a cottage zoning ordinance in place. No one has yet tried to build anything like that, but that is a way to downsize for folks that have 4-bedroom houses and 2 or less people living in those. The other thing is that I also liked Councilman Wedgemont comment about the trees and putting trees in. And unfortunately, often we see images of projects that have trees and some open space, but I think maybe Colin Penny mentioned that often once you put in the infrastructure and all the engineering, those trees can go away. So you have to be really, really careful about how they're designed. That's pretty much all I have. But thank you for having this special work session. It's appreciated, even though we were only told Tuesday, last night, about this. But thank you for doing this, and hope you do it again.
Thank you, Maria.
We should make sure that when you come back, Jeremy, that we make sure that the planning board is invited to the meeting. Jamie. Jim.
More notice than the night before, definitely. Jamie. All right. Anyone else in the audience? All right, that's going to bring us to the. We're ending it here. We've had a lot of good discussion. It's been a good meeting, a lot of good collaboration between us all. But thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you at the next one.
Good night, South Kingstown.